The Batleys were not your ordinary neighbors. They stood out in the small, sleepy town of Kidwelly, Wales, with a population of only 3,523, where people went to work at pubs and small shops near the towering remains of a giant castle built by the invading Normans in 1106. But somehow, despite the occult horror show going on in their home, they didn't stand out enough to get caught. Colin and Elaine Batley had met in London in the 1980s. They moved to Kidwelly in the mid-90s, and they didn't do it for love of Welsh heritage. They did it because property was cheaper, and there would be less prying eyes, not as many law enforcement and other authorities to keep tabs on them. In Kidwelly, Colin had to have raised some eyebrows. The rakish, thin man with scraggly hair, missing most of his front teeth, didn't talk much to any of his neighbors, except to leer at them when people crossed the street in front of his home to avoid his two massive Rottweilers. Pretty soon, another family moved to Kidwelly from London and settled on the same street, and they would talk to Colin and his wife. And they would visit his house often, at all hours of the night. But they didn't interact with anyone else. And then another family moved in and exhibited the same exact behavior. And then another did. Suddenly, there was an entire community of people from London who made zero effort to befriend anyone from Kidwelly. They were odd, but no one could figure out if they were doing anything illegal. Their lifestyle didn't make sense to many. None of them seemed to work, or work very much, and yet they had enough money to host crazy parties, complete with elaborate fireworks displays, parties where no one actually from Kidwelly was ever invited. When a few nosy locals inquired about them, they would say they were Mormons. But that didn't make much sense. Locals occasionally saw the group's women lewdly touching each other in public places. They also noticed how Colin and some of the others left in a van a couple times a year for up to a few weeks at a time, and there were rumors he was selling porn or cigarettes or both in France, which would not be very Mormon of them. But if they weren't Mormon, what were they? That was a question that wouldn't be answered until Colin and his fellow cult members' shocking trial went on in 2011. A trial that revealed that Colin had been leading a dark cult based on the hedonistic occult teachings of Aleister Crowley for over a decade. A cult based almost entirely around his abusive and insatiable sexual desires. It would become known as the Kidwelly sex cult, and most of its victims were children. Once upon a time in Wales, the Satanic Panic was real. The Kidwelly sex cult, right now, on a dark, occult, cult edition of Timesuck.
This is Michael McDonald, and you're listening to Timesuck.
You're listening to Timesuck.
Happy Monday! And welcome to the Cult of the Curious. That was unnecessary. I'm Dan Cummins, the master sucker, Hong Shu Kwan's test tutor, the king of the Southeast, former Dr. Feelgood to both Michael Jackson and Elvis Presley, and you are listening to Timesuck. And I don't have any announcements this week, but I have been loving the new 21 Pilots album, Clancy. That's all. Just been playing the hell out of it and have a lot of respect and admiration for those two Columbus, Ohio dudes and what they've done with their music. And now let's get started. I'm guessing you have probably never heard of the Kidwelly sex cult, unless you're obsessed with learning about every cult you can, unless you live in the UK and were following the news pretty closely in the early 2010s. Even so, you might have still missed out on the story. It got surprisingly very little press, and it is still very largely overlooked. The leader of the cult, Colin Batley, made a few headlines again, mostly in Wales, in 2021 and 2023, when rumors circulated that he might have been released from prison. Thankfully, he was not. Authorities confirmed that, and then the story of him and his cult would just quickly die down again, which again is surprising, since it's such a dark and macabrely fascinating story. Despite news of Kidwelly popping up again in the heyday of cult docuseries and true crime reporting, nobody seems to have really latched on to the story and spoken in depth about what happened when a group of occult-loving Londoners moved into a cul-de-sac in a little Welsh town in the mid-1990s. There's been no definitive book written about Kidwelly, besides the shocking and well-reviewed memoir of a former cult member, but even that book is not available in digital form, and it took our lead researcher this week weeks to get a physical copy. And there have been no long, in-depth articles written that delve into the group's darkest secrets. Why? Well, for one thing, the Kidwelly sex cult mostly preyed on children, and when its perpetrators were arrested, the cult's victims were granted lifelong anonymity, meaning their names were kept out of the papers and any TV reporting entirely, which is the right call. This was done undoubtedly so the victims, many of them still in their late teens and early 20s at that point, would have a chance to finally be able to live a normal life, a life that had been thus far denied to them from experiencing. But it leaves no one to interview, except the leader of this cult and his minions, almost all of whom were sent to prison for being pedophiles, and none of whom seemed very interested in talking about the unbelievably disgusting, depraved sexual acts they either took part in or looked the other way when they knew that those acts were occurring. This means that some important things that we normally work hard to provide here, like specific dates, full names of members, Colin, the cult leader's full background, not as available as they would normally be. But do not worry. There is still plenty of material for us to work into a proper story. While we don't know as much about the cult compared to, say, Keith Raniere's NXIVM, which was the subject of multiple docuseries, Colin Batley's Kidwelly sex cult is definitely worth covering. And why? Well, for starters, this cult is not based in some offshoot of Christianity or any other Abrahamic religion, or actually any major religion at all. Sometimes, thanks to covering so many abusive cults that have sprung out of Christianity here in the U.S., I have definitely begun to think that Christianity itself was the problem, that there was something fundamentally problematic about its history and beliefs that just make it too easy for cult leaders to twist its teachings in ways that too easily draw people in to be abused, people who have been primed to be able to be abused since they've already employed a lot of magical thinking to be Christian. I've thought that if you could just erase Christianity, more people would think logically instead of magically, and less people would be taken advantage of and be abused. And this cult is a good reminder, this week's cult, that we humans are the problem when it comes to cults, not any religion. When it comes to the age-old chicken and egg dilemma, which came first, well, people came first, we're the egg. And the chicken is religion, we came up with it. And when the old religions have died, new ones have always sprung up in their place. Even if you destroyed all the world's religions, people would still wonder about the infinite, the nature of existence, still speculate about the whims of the god or gods or a god. And then some people would undoubtedly claim that they could communicate with the god or the gods. And they would become new prophets and form some new spiritual belief system. And even if that new belief system wasn't inherently bad for their followers, a few people would twist the teachings further in ways that were bad for the followers in order to satisfy their own carnal and other ego-based desires. Right? When we think of cults, I think it's really important to remember that religion is not actually the problem. People are the problem. We have, we've covered a sexually abusive cult here that was based in communism, in a belief system where there is no religion, there is no gods. The Naddle-fed communist cult, episode 363. We've covered a cult based in psychiatry, the Sullivanians, episode 333. And now we cover a cult based in the occult. And this all leads me to the conclusion that some of us meat sacks just fucking suck. Right? Some of us statistically, are and may always be sociopaths who just truly lack any and all empathy for others. Some of us don't give a fuck who we hurt, how deeply we hurt them. Some of us only care about ourselves and are only driven by Aleister Crowley's selfish, self-serving maxim of do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. The maxim that today's cult was based in. Today's cult is always interesting in that its leader, also interesting, and that its leader doesn't have a background typical for a cult leader. Many cult leaders cut their teeth in career areas that have helped them hone manipulation tactics that they can call upon later. Keith Raniere, for example, worked for the infamous multi-level marketing company Amway. The good God Amway, maker of quality, affordable household essentials like Amway Home, SA 8-powder laundry detergent, only $49 for 99 loads, less than 50 cents per load of laundry. Sorry. But Raniere worked for Amway before founding a multi-level marketing company of his own, Consumers Byline Incorporated, and then he would use his shady multi-level marketing skills to recruit people into NXIVM, encouraging them to take the group's courses and to recruit more people underneath them. Other cult leaders, most of them have honed their persuasive abilities within a major organized religion, like Jim Jones, who was ordained as a Christian minister in the Independent Assemblies of God, attracting his first group of followers while participating in the Pentecostal Latter Rain movement and healing revival during the 1950s. Jones, Raniere, countless others we've covered have proceeded to take the skills they have learned, whether through business or religion, and systematically use them to bring people under their sway to be controlled and abused. They use their education, their backgrounds, anything at their disposal, to convince people that their way of seeing the world was the right way of seeing the world. Colin Batley doesn't have such a background. We don't know much about his early days, but he never talked about attending church, any church. He never achieved a high-level career in, well, anything at all. Didn't seem to have learned any skills anywhere. And yet he managed to pull people under his sway with the sheer force of his manipulative personality. In this respect, Batley is a lot more like Charles Manson, the infamous leader of the Manson family, than he is to most of the other cult leaders we have covered. Like Manson, Batley worked a series of low-level jobs, never achieving much before he moved on to the next thing. Manson's first followers were recruited from the streets of California. He met Mary Brunner, 23-year-old library assistant in 1968. Before long, he overcame Brunner's initial resistance to him and then brought in other women to live with him. Soon they were sharing Brunner's residence with 18 other women. Something very similar would happen with Colin Batley. The people who were his followers weren't initially religious zealots or people seeking out help, but a ragtag group, mainly women, who just found themselves drawn into Colin's orbit because, well, I don't fucking know. He made them feel special, perhaps. They were sexually adventurous and liked the kinky shit he encouraged them to participate in that they maybe couldn't find in other relationships. Both of those reasons and others. Like with Manson, these women would do anything for him. They gladly handed over the money they got from government benefits and part-time work. They gave Colin all the sex, care, and attention he craved. They fought for his attention bitterly and eagerly took the opportunity to please Colin through having sex with other people if he told them to. They even handed over their own children for Colin to instruct, abuse, molest, and rape. At least one of them even had sex with her child, per his instruction, and didn't seem to be bothered by that, like, at all. Eventually, he even easily convinced some of them to work for him as prostitutes, very busy sex workers who saw dozens of clients a day, and then, of course, handed all of their cash over to him. If Colin had been more homicidal, he would have definitely been able to convince his cult members to murder someone or multiple someones, and it's likely that the Kidwelly sex cult would rank up there with the Manson family as one of the most infamous cults of all time. But instead of murder, Colin was focused on one thing and one thing only: sex. So much sex. The Kidwelly sex cult was an engine that ran almost entirely on Colin's voracious, insatiable sexual appetite. Colin was truly obsessed with sex from the age of about 12. And he would spend his life constructing a group where he could get it all the time, whenever he wanted, from whoever he wanted, even or especially if those people were children. He didn't even need the power of LSD or other mind-altering drugs on his side, as Charles Manson did. Kidwelly cult members weren't allowed to do drugs or even drink alcohol. No, Colin convinced sober people, to let him do terrible things to and with them, and to and with their children, mostly on sheer willpower. And that is truly terrifying. To cover Colin Batley and the Kidwelly sex cult, we'll first look today at the works of literature or theology that would inspire Colin, or at least give him the rationalization to commit his most heinous acts, and to rope others into those acts as well. The teachings of one Aleister Crowley, and the lema, the esoteric religious movement that he based in the occult. While Crowley is often referred to as satanic, that is not technically true. I'd say he was satanic adjacent. And that calling a cult based on following his teaching satanic, while not technically correct, is also pretty accurate, ideology-wise. Do you remember Aleister Crowley? We covered him way back in bonus episode 18, March 9th, 2018. We will recap his life today, a life of sin, sex, and magic, with a K, that would go on to be featured in the works of heavy metal pioneer Ozzy Osbourne, the Beatles cover for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. David Bowie would become very interested in Crowley for a while. Led Zeppelin, those guys got way into him. Even Tool, many other bands and artists. Crowley inspired or influenced many people, still does, and unfortunately some of them are real dirtbags like Colin Batley. The concept of true will was at the core of Crowley's philosophy. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And Batley took that view to the extreme. After we get into Crowley and Colin Batley's wicked take on his wicked work, we will dive into today's Timesuck timeline following the members of the group, especially Annabelle Forrest, whose memoir, The Devil on the Doorstep, is one of the main sources for this episode. And one of the only sources on this cult. As I mentioned, not the easiest book to get a hold of anymore, sadly. So let's get started. Find out how this week's cult connects with Aleister Crowley, a native of Shoreditch, London, and a former Tesco security guard. Colin Batley would lead a group that raped children for well over a decade. Over 2 decades, in Colin's case individually at least, until its perpetrators were arrested in 2010. known by its members as simply the Church. Batley's group would psychologically terrorize and coerce vulnerable children into performing sexual acts through years of intense brainwashing and manipulation. Life in the group was centered around ceremonies, with women dressed in robes, all of them tattooed with the ancient Egyptian eye of Horus, the protection symbol. An altar would be set out with a goblet of red wine, an incense burner, and salted bread. After listening to Colin's hours-long speeches, sect members would disrobe, or in their words, become sky-clad, a pagan term for ritual nudity, and have sex. And this wasn't just Colin. We'll meet his associates, including his wife, Elaine, in the timeline. But just know for now that he had help. How do they justify all of this? How could they possibly think or convince each other that the sexual abuse of minors was okay or even good? Some serial abusers, well, they need no justification. Like former Suck subjects Fred and Rose West from episode 250, who seem to have raped and killed women together for nothing more than their sexual pleasure, mostly Fred's, and their natural propensity for violence, also mostly Fred's. But some repeat offenders create an immersive world in which they make it seem okay for them to do these things, even necessary, by twisting existing ideology or creating their own. Remember Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell from Suck 378 recently, how they had to kill Lori's two kids, Tylee and JJ, because they were zombies, demonic zombies, and Lori and Chad were level 1 billion light gods or whatever. It's no surprise that many cult members are like this, taking elements from the Bible or other religions, or writing their own complicated theology that has them on top and everyone else at the bottom. But the source of inspiration for the leaders of the Kidwelly cult wouldn't be your regular Bible or any other conventional religious tract. They were in search of something darker, something sexier, something that made them feel edgy and powerful. And they found that in the works of Aleister Crowley. Crowley was an early 20th century British occultist, writer, and practitioner of magic, the occult ritualization of spiritual intentions, who called himself the Beast 666. Not the kind of thing that makes one very popular in Victorian England. Or I guess made one, since that was a while back. Originally born Edward Alexander Crowley on October 12, 1875, in the quaint, small central English city of Royal Leamington Spa, England, Aleister grew up as the son of the heir to a British fortune. Fucking trust funders. They often just get so weird, don't they? Someone who has to pay their own way through life is probably going to be pretty reluctant to essentially give the middle finger to almost the entirety of society around them by referring to themselves as the Beast 666 in a conservative Christian nation. Might make it like a bit harder to get and or keep a job. But if you're sitting on a big old pile of daddy's or granddaddy's money, you can afford to piss off everyone around you and still be rich. And that situation has led a lot more people than just Aleister Crowley into living some pretty atypical, unorthodox lives. Aleister's dad, in addition to growing up with a bunch of brewery money, was an evangelist for the Plymouth Brethren, a nonconformist religious denomination that practiced, amongst other things, shunning. So the rich kid who rebels hard against daddy's strict beliefs, story's old as time. Younger Crowley didn't take to religion, probably because his parents were becoming true fanatics, especially after the death of his younger sister Grace, who lived for only 5 hours. His parents' grief pushed them into religious extremism, or at least that's how Eddie, saw things. Eddie would be a pretty obedient little boy growing up, but as a student at Trinity College, University of Cambridge, he took on the name Aleister, the Gaelic version of his middle name of Alexander, didn't like being called Edward or any of its derivatives anymore, or being called Alexander, Alex, or Alec, so he changed his name. Then he abandons his degree entirely, now using his fortune, and by his, I mean his family's fortune, to publish his own interesting writings. Something he'll do for the rest of his life. Again, stereotypical trust funder mentality. How fun it must be to be a creative spirit unencumbered by any financial stressors. In addition to publishing his occult writings, he'll also get real into mountain climbing. As a mountaineer, Crowley began honing his skills on various cliffs in Great Britain before taking part in pioneering attempts to climb Earth's second and third highest mountains, K2 and Kanchenjunga. But mountaineering, of course, isn't really what Crowley would become known for. Like many other religious skeptics of the 19th century, Crowley became interested in occultism. And in 1898, he joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, an organization derived from the Rosicrucians, a worldwide brotherhood dedicated to esoteric wisdom handed down from ancient times. Not being a member of this brotherhood, I'm not sure what their secret wisdom is, but they talk a big game. On Rosicrucian.org, they write, "The Rosicrucian teachings offer you access to a vast storehouse of profound wisdom carefully preserved for centuries. The Rosicrucian system of study enables students to achieve their highest potential and bring about a transformation on all levels of being: physical, mental, emotional, psychic, and spiritual. Oh, well, sign me up, you silly grifters. God, I can't wait to fully unlock my psychic potential. Holy shit. Every episode of this show will start going fucking viral. I mean, hugely. Because I will finally know, psychically, exactly what the zeitgeist is most interested in discovering that week. And I'll become the wealthiest, most powerful podcaster in history! Hail Nimrod and go fuck yourselves! Something like that. I'm back now. A few years later, during a visit to Egypt in 1904, perhaps the favorite place in the world for occults to visit due to so much fascination with ancient Egyptian gods and rituals, occultists, Crowley reported mystical experiences and began writing the Book of Law, which will not be published until 1909. And this source of inspiration is important. Crowley would be very, very inspired by Egypt. He and his wife at the time, Rose Kelly, they would only be married for 6 years, would have their honeymoon in Cairo, where they even spent the night in the king's chamber inside the Great Pyramid, which Crowley arranged so he could work his magic inside a powerful spiritual monument. The odd shit old family money can buy you. Also, these two dipshits would have 2 kids, and they would name one of them, their first daughter, wait for it, Nuit Ma ra-hoor-khuit, Sappho Jezebel Lilith. For real, that's what they named an actual human being. Back when it was even weirder than now to give someone a super fucked up name like that. Nuit would tragically die before she was about to turn 2 years old. Once she was old enough to understand how dumb her name was, she killed herself, you guys. She learned to walk, learned how to tie a noose, and she learned how to not be raised by Aleister Crowley. No, that's horrible and absurd. But she did die. She died of typhus in Rangoon, Myanmar. Crowley apparently did not seem too distraught over her passing. Aleister, this guy is super fucking selfish. Aleister would later abandon their other daughter, Lola Zaza Crowley, and she would go on to entirely disown her father as an adult because he was a fuckhead. And his wife, Rose, Aleister, had her committed to an asylum for alcohol dementia. I think that was just his way of getting rid of her when he got tired of having her around. She'd get out, go on to marry a doctor, be married for a lot of years, and be just fine. He would later write, morally and mentally, women were for me beneath contempt. Intellectually, of course, they did not exist. Yeah, he was a real arrogant, narcissistic, naughty boy who refused to go pee in the potty. But I digress. On their honeymoon night in the king's chamber inside the Great Pyramid, Aleister and Rose performed the Bornless Ritual. Cue spooky music. The Bornless is based on Greek magical papyri, a collection of old scrolls containing magical spells and rituals written in Greek between the 2nd and 5th centuries BCE in Egypt. In ancient times, this ritual was used for exorcisms of demons and healing. Crowley believed that an invocation of the Bornless One could grant the invoker access to tremendously powerful immortal deities who could bestow divine guidance and protection upon him from malevolent spiritual forces. He believed that the ritual could alter your state of consciousness and allow you to communicate with the divine. And Crowley will claim that during this ritual, Rose kept repeatedly saying, they're waiting for you. Presumably referring to Horus, the Egyptian god of kingship, healing, protection, sun, and sky. Apparently Rose had no familiarity with the Egyptian deities before this, so Crowley took this as a sign that, for real, no shit, you guys, for real, Horus is trying to contact me. After another supernatural experience, allegedly involving Aiwass, an entity he said was an emissary of Horus, others have called it a demon, or just some shit he made up, Crowley began to write the Book of the Law. Actually, he said Aiwass wrote it. He just, took it all down, which would make him a prophet. In it, he formulated his most famous teaching, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Basically, whatever you want to do is totally fine. Pure hedonism. A spirit told him that. Or, he told himself that. Or, that's just what he wanted to do. And his subconscious mind told him that. With this maxim, there's no need to think about ethical implications, whether you should or shouldn't do something. If you want to do something, to borrow Nike's slogan, you just do it. And this sentiment, so edgy, was not some new thought. There were hedonist philosophers going back to the 4th century BCE in ancient Greece, at least, talking about this principle. Still, Crowley decided that this maxim was good enough to be the basis for a new religion he called Thelema. Actually, I'm not sure that he called it Thelema. I'm just pulling that out of my ass. I'm assuming so, but that's what it's called, Thelema. Alternatively pronounced as Thelema, derived from the Greek word for will. The Book of the Law would be Thelema's Bible, and in it, Crowley proclaimed the arrival of a new stage in the spiritual evolution of humanity to be known as the Aeon of Horus, where everything will follow that guideline of no rules, only one's will. The first chapter is spoken by Nuit, the Egyptian goddess of the night sky, called the Queen of Space. Oh, hell yeah! I bet the Queen of Space is hot as fuck, right? Super sexy hippie lady with like one of those thin gold chains that connects from a piercing in your nose to another one in your ear. And her nipples are pierced for sure. And she has like a dope back piece, like really cool, like a culty thigh piece. Hail the Queen of Space! Hail Lucifina! Is this you? Crowley calls her the Lady of the Starry Heaven, who is also matter in its deepest metaphysical sense, who is the infinite in whom we all live and move and have our being. Second chapter is pretty sure I fucking saw this lady when I was on DMT a few times. Second chapter, spoken by Hadith, refers to himself as the complement of Nuit. As such, he is the infinitely condensed point, the center of her infinite circumference or some shit. Crowley says of him, he is the eternal energy, the infinite motion of things, the central core of all being. The manifested universe comes from the marriage of Nuit and Hadith. Without this could no thing be. I hate the way they fucking have to write shit all weird for this stuff. This eternal, this perpetual marriage feast is then the nature of things themselves, and therefore everything that exists is a crystallization of divine ecstasy. Yeah, sure. Totally understand what he's saying there, 100%, Hail Nimrod. Third chapter is spoken by Ra-hoor-khuit, god of war and vengeance. The crowned and conquering child, a powerful entity made up by Crowley, in amalgamation with some ancient Egyptian gods, and a god very likely created while Aleister was high as fuck. A model for the initiate, this entity describes attainment as the natural growth process, de-emphasizing the metaphor of death and resurrection. And so what is the purpose of all this shit? In the Confessions of Aleister Crowley in Hagiography, published first in 1929, pretentious Crowley would sum up its point thusly: the emancipation of mankind from all limitations whatsoever is one of the main precepts of the book. So all this jibber-jabber is knowledge that can, set you free. I have a much more concise mantra to accomplish the same exact thing. It's tattooed on my right bicep, actually. Embrace the darkness. Accept that not all knowledge is meant for us to be known, at least not at this time, and make your peace with the unknowing. Try to harm the least, help the most, enjoy every moment of love and beauty in this life that you can, because nothing more is promised to any of us. If we get something extra, what a wonderful and unexpected bonus. So what exactly did Crowley think that others in Victorian England needed to be liberated from? What limits did they face? Well, the one that Crowley seemed the most interested in, not surprisingly, since he was a dude with a dick and a strong sex drive, was sex. And wanting to get, their fuck on has motivated all kinds of dudes to come up with all kinds of new teachings. To be fair, Aleister's Victorian England did have an extremely repressive attitude towards sex. Imagine a new bride so terrified of some rude action her husband has just tried to commit, like putting his finger into her vagina. Heavens to Betsy, what are you doing with that dirty digit down near her? Good girl, go peep in the potty hole. That she literally runs home to her parents and asks for an annulment the next day. Imagine a woman going into labor and truly believing that the infant is going to exit her body via her belly button, because she actually does not understand what her vagina is for. It's just some strange hole that she only knows that God doesn't want her to touch it. Some hole next to this strange little clit, sin lord the devil put down there, hoping she would take 2 fingers and go fishing. No, thank you, Satan! Not today, mother trucker! I ain't gonna come and squirt my way into hell. These terrifying circumstances where women had no reproductive or sexual knowledge prior to real-life experience was very much a typical reality. According to Roy Porter and Leslie Hall in The Facts of Life, Creation of Sexual Knowledge in Britain. In Victorian England, a woman was fully expected to not just be a virgin on her wedding day, but to be somebody truly and completely ignorant to any and all sexual knowledge. Sex was thought of as a way for married couples to spiritually bond and procreate only. Sex without the possibility of procreation, even within marriage, was considered sinful, and the topic of contraception, extremely taboo. While the bride was expected to be pure on her wedding night, however, it was understood that her new husband, especially if he was rich, or even just working class, would probably have had sexual experiences before with sex workers. God looks the other way when it comes to us dick owners. Always has. Oh, thank you, God. Great to be a dude. We make the rules and we don't apply them to ourselves. Oh, fuck yeah. Spring break forever. Sorry, ladies. Be sure and keep your bikes clean and unridden. Well, we're out riding so many other ladies' bikes. Wait, how'd that work? Anyway, by the late 1700s, over 10,000 prostitutes worked the London streets, spreading not just sexual knowledge, but a lot of sexually transmitted diseases. The dudes would then bring home to their chaste wives. How fun. While all of these men were learning about sex through the unrealistic and performative veil of prostitution, their middle-class brides-to-be were largely blissfully unaware of the sexual nature of marriage, or even the mechanics of their reproductive health. This meant that many full-grown women did not understand how sex worked on any level or where babies came from. There were exceptions, of course, but the mainstream culture, sexually ignorant. Sex was taboo, dirty, illicit, except in the confines of a heterosexual marriage, and even then, again, only for procreation. And what a waste of all those nerve endings. So many dicks unnecessarily dry, so many clits fully ignored and neglected, so many sweet, sweet titties of all shapes and sizes, never getting their nipples licked, sucked, or nibbled on, so many buttholes and sacks of balls, just left alone to rot in the darkness. And Lucifina wept. Crowley's life was an open rebellion against this type of Victorian repression, and he started his rebellion early. In early 1892, the 16-year-old Crowley's sexual life began when he lost his virginity to a so-called theater girl. His next sexual encounter was with the family parlor maid on his mother's bed. How naughty! Bed was fucking hot. Going against a strict upbringing felt good, felt magical. In college, Aleister also had sexual relations with other men, including one with Jerome Pollitt, had a relationship with him that would last around 6 months, with Crowley at one point calling himself Jerome's wife. His next boyfriend of sorts, more of a disciple and sex slave, would be Victor Newberg, whom he met in 1908. He would take Victor to Algiers to perform occult rituals, and in one of these rituals, he would combine sex and magic for the first time. And this would give him the belief that sexual energy is a potent force that can be harnessed to transcend reality. He must have came so hard. He began to believe that sex magic could even do shit like drive demons back to hell. You gotta fuck that butt to get that demon back to hell. What are you doing? Get your dick in that butt. You want that demon hanging around? Crowley believed he did that with the demon Karanzan. He believed was the obstacle between humanity and enlightenment, this demon. With Victor penetrating him or him penetrating Victor, there seemed to be nothing that sex magic couldn't do, in direct opposition to pretty much every Victorian attitude about sex ever. They fucked the shit out of each other's mouths and butts. Probably literally sometimes. Fucked each other so silly, they believed it was literally magical, that they had fucking superpowers. Aleister's Book of Law will say, each individual has an absolute right to satisfy his sexual instinct, as is physiologically proper for him. The one injunction is to treat all such acts as sacraments. One should not eat as the brutes, but in order to enable one to do one's will. Same applies to sex. We must use every faculty to further the one object of our existence. To be fair to Crowley, he wasn't the only thinker of his time who thought that loosening attitudes about sex could help transform the world. Crowley had other contemporaries like Edward Carpenter, Havelock Ellis, D.H. Lawrence, all of whom viewed erotic liberation as key to social transformation, that once people let go of closed-off attitudes about sex, real societal progress could occur. Crowley called his erotic liberation ideals enlightenment. But the way Crowley starts to talk about this stuff becomes problematic. No individual has a right to satisfy their sexual lust at the expense of another. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law can too easily be interpreted as permission to do shit like rape and molest, pedophilia. Now, if you read further into Crowley's The Book of the Law, he makes an argument against rape and pedophilia, writing and referring to himself as the Beast 666 here. The Beast 666 ordains by his authority that every man and every woman and every intermediately sexed individual shall be absolutely free to interpret and communicate self by means of any sexual practices soever, whether direct or indirect, rational or symbolic, physiologically, legally, ethically, or religiously approved or no, provided only that all parties to any act are fully aware of all implications and responsibilities thereof, and heartily agree thereto. Again, I hate that they have to fucking write this shit all flowery. He doesn't make it crystal clear, though. Here, do not fuck with kids, right? He doesn't say that explicitly. He doesn't make that point clear enough, I don't think. Furthermore, while Crowley never openly advocated for pedophilia, English existentialist and later 20th century author who focused on true crime, mysticism, and the paranormal, Colin Wilson, did touch on Crowley's supposed pedophilic tendencies in his books, The Occult, A History. In his diary after a heavy drug binge, lots of coke, Crowley did write, amongst other things, "And I, the worm, have trailed my slug-slow slime across her breasts, so that her mother mood is turned and her breasts itch with lust of incest. She," Rose Kelly here, "hath given her 2-year-old bastard boy to her lewd lover's whim of sodomy, hath taught him speech and act, things infinitely abhorred. With her own beastly carcass she hath tongued her 5-month girl, and asked its father to deflower it. She hath wished her beast to rape her rotten old mother." Gross? You can see how musings like these, whether he's referring to having a weird dream, or talking about real life, or some vision, or just, fantasy, passing fantasy, whatever, could give his followers a lot of bad ideas. Also, some sources indicate that while in Italy in the 1920s, Crowley and his partners did have sex in front of children in these orgies. And all of this was incredibly inspiring and exciting for one Colin Batley. He saw the Book of the Law and Crowley's writings and, like the equinox of the gods as evidence that child sexual abuse was not only fine, it was good. Or at least that's what Colin would tell his victims and followers. There's no evidence he himself believed that. In fact, he seemed to know his desires could get him in trouble. Though neighbors would catch glimpses of the Batleys and other cult members acting weird, like Elaine and another woman sexually touching each other out while running errands, Colin made sure that the most vulnerable members of the group never got the opportunity to talk about what was going on inside the houses where the group lived. Annabelle Forrest, whose mother, Jackie Marling, would offer her up as a sexual sacrifice to Colin beginning when Annabelle was just 7, would later recount that she never went outside alone when she was a little kid. During her early years in London, before living essentially in a cult compound, Annabelle's life was filled with normal childhood outings, trips to the park, to the store, to museums, concerts with her aunts, uncles, grandparents. But at the age of 7, she moved to Kidwelly with her mother and younger sister, Olivia, and just stopped going outside, at least unaccompanied. Colin told them to not leave the house since they were members of the church. He said they had to keep church secrets at all times. Annabelle was not allowed to go to the store by herself or even down the street by herself. By the time she was 18, she had never even been in a proper like retail clothing store. Like some place like the Gap. Any place that wasn't a home of a cult member or Colin's house terrified her. She'd been raised to fear the outside world. Of course, Annabelle and the other children in the cult had to go to school. If they didn't, they were at risk for authorities trying to investigate what was going on. But Colin had a solution for that. He told them to tell people at school they were Mormons and to not spend time or befriend or talk too much with anyone outside the group. And that was what Annabelle did. She was so isolated that for years she didn't even realize anything bad was happening. She didn't realize she was being raped and forced to have incestuous sex with her own mother. She didn't realize that was a terrible thing to happen. She didn't know she was living with a man that epitomized not religious salvation, but pure evil. Now that we understand a bit about the belief system Colin based his cult mumbo-jumbo in, let's tell the story in today's Timesuck timeline.
Strap on those boots, soldier. We're marching down a Timesuck timeline.
We don't know much about Colin Batley's early life, as I mentioned earlier. We do know he was born in the later summer or late summer, early fall of 1962 in the London East End neighborhood of Shoreditch. Thank you, birth registries. So sometime in July, August, September, maybe early October of that year. Today's Shoreditch is an artsy hipster hangout, according to several articles online, full of trendy bars, record stores, music venues. Several videos I found referred to it as the best area of London. It does look very, very cool. Was not that cool when Colin grew up there. The area had been heavily bombed in World War II, hit by at least 279 high explosive bombs, 6 parachute mines, 7 V-1 doodlebugs, 2 V-2 rockets, thousands of 1 kilogram incendiary devices. And all of that, not surprisingly, led to an overall decline in the area, with much of Shoreditch's industry, a lot of furniture manufacturing in particular went on there prior to the war, moving elsewhere. In the mid-1960s, the main streets of Shoreditch, Old Street, Shoreditch High Street, and Curtin Road, Great Eastern Street, were merged into a 1-mile-long one-way system which became associated with traffic congestion, poor conditions for walking and cycling, high speeds, high collision rates, and delays for bus services. And the area began to suffer from urban decay, crime, and social problems. It was largely ignored by the authorities and the public for years. Abandoned warehouses and factories became temporary homes for squatters, transients, and shady characters. And it was in this environment that Colin would grow up. His father was a lorry driver. Colin would later claim that his father sexually abused him when he was young. Maybe he did. We only have his word to go on there. We do know that his family struggled for money, and that at the age of 12, Colin sexually abused a younger child on multiple occasions. It's unclear who the child was, or where and how it happened, but whatever it was, it set Colin on a dark path. At the age of 19, he meets his future wife, Elaine Robinson, an 18-year-old native of East London, not far from where Colin grew up. Sources indicate that they had a very quick courtship, during which Elaine got pregnant, and then they got married. In January of 1982, when Colin is still 19, the couple gets hitched. Later that year, their first child, a son, Damien, is born. They'll have 2 more children, another son, and then years later, a daughter. And now, tasked with supporting his young family, Colin goes to work. He'll work at a fruit stand for a while, then as a night security guard for the supermarket Tesco. Then he will breed Rottweilers and Siamese cats. So he's not exactly settling into a proper career path, instead just working some odd jobs. Some point in the 80s, cat breeding Colin becomes obsessed with Aleister Crowley and the Book of the Law. In his mind, the Book of the Law, with its emphasis on true will, gives him permission to do everything and anything he wants to do, especially when it comes to sex. He starts to introduce Crowley's works to Elaine. Elaine apparently is into it, and soon they begin talking about it with their wider circle of friends, eventually forming a quasi-erotic book club dedicated to Crowley's teachings as interpreted by Colin. And in this little group, his authority on Crowley's books is supreme. Everyone's invited to read them, but only Colin will tell you what they truly mean. So the very beginnings of some cult mentality here. And Colin's group of friends and acquaintances apparently accept this. And the man who has never experienced a taste of any power in the workforce now feels like he's a big shot amongst his little circle of fellow occultists. Gets a little taste of authority, and he likes it. And the seeds of his future cult are planted. And soon Colin grows bored of just talking about Crowley's books, so he decides to up the ante. And he declares himself the Prince Priest and says he has a direct connection to the Egyptian gods of Crowley's lema. Tells his friends who become his followers that the gods now tell him what to do. And we are off and running. Oh, someone special is talking to the heavens. Cult. So now, if the gods of Thelema know everything, and as gods typically do, that means Colin knows everything. And no one can hide anything from him. The lowly Siamese cat breeder is now an omnipotent vessel of the divine. And for his friend followers, serving the gods is now equal to serving Colin. So now they truly become a cult. Right? They even get robes. How fun. Colin gets everyone purple robes. Oh, fuck yeah. And during elaborate ceremonies, he will require everyone to be naked under their robes as he drones on and on about Crowley, Egyptian gods, and the Book of the Law. And then after the sermon, it is orgy time. Oh, let's get it. Oh, woohoo. Yeah. Oh, this book club just got fucking exciting. Yeah, each ceremony would end in group sex. There was a lot of sex in what Colin and his followers were now calling the church. There was spouse swapping, threesomes, foursomes, basically any sexual configuration you can think of. Hoping the Rottweilers and Siamese cats were not involved, but who knows? I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of fucking and sucking. A lot of sweat, a lot of lube. The gods of ancient Egypt, they be horny gods. But Colin wasn't satisfied. He wasn't satisfied with this because his real desire wasn't just to have sex with adults. This was just the first step towards his deepest, darkest desires. He was breaking down boundaries around sex with other adults so that they might come to see sex and morality at large as this nebulous gray area where just about anything can go, right? Everything's permissible. Even or especially having sex with a child. And some of the people in his group are already parents to young children. Kids, it seems, Colin already has his pervy eyes on. Let's meet one of those kids now, the author to the best source out there about Colin, the devil on the doorstep, my escape from a satanic sex cult. In 1989, Annabelle Forrest, a pseudonym used to keep her true identity hidden, is born to Jackie Marlene and a man identified in Annabelle's memoir only as David. Seems outside of a few high-ranking cult members in Colin, all the names in this book have been changed to protect the identities of those once exploited by this cult and their peripheral family members. Annabelle's parents split up when she was 2, and the new man of the house was her mother's partner, Alan, father of her half-sister, Olivia. Annabelle had a good relationship with her dad, David, when she was very, very young. He was affectionate with her. She adored him, but soon he got himself a new family. He had other children to worry about. So it was Alan who was now picking her up and dropping her off from school. And I always hate to hear about shit like this so much. I mean, good for Alan stepping up, but fuck David, right? The story of a dad who just gets a new family and just pieces out on the old one. Sorry, kid, but like, it's just like more fun, to hang out with my new kids who I had with a woman I still get along with, So you get it. I mean, you're cool and all, you're like a pretty cool kid, but it's like a bit of a hassle to spend time with you, honestly. So like, best luck and shit. Don't cry. Hey, you already got a new dad. It's all good. Luckily, Alan was a great stepdad. He was more of a parent than her birth mom, Jackie, ever was. Jackie never hugged her, never read her stories at night. Jackie, as you'll see, is a piece of shit. She's about as bad of a mom as you can get. But Alan was a good parent. Like many others in the book, in the block of flats where they lived, Alan and Jackie struggled financially, lived on welfare benefits after Jackie lost her job as a dental nurse. But despite not having much materially, Annabelle was not short on love in her younger years, despite her dad being out of the picture, and her mom not really, mostly out of the picture. He was kind of around the periphery. And her mom not really caring about being a mom. She had grandparents who lived not far away. She had Alan. She had 2 aunts, Jackie's 2 sisters. With her aunt Becca, Annabelle would often go on camping trips to museums and parks. Christmases and summers were always spent at her grandparents' house. With her grandfather, she would raid the fridge, eating ham straight out of the package, even though her grandma hated her doing that, or at least playfully teased her about it. Young Annabelle couldn't get enough of their food, right? Cocktail sausages, Babel cheese, cherry Bakewell tart slices. She wasn't getting anything like that at home. Meanwhile, as Annabelle begins elementary school, her mom, Jackie, grown closer and closer to Colin Batley and his fucked up teachings. Tall and slim with long auburn hair, Jackie had a tattoo of a shark on her shoulder, and her look had caught Colin's eye. Women like Jackie were Colin's perfect candidates. Slim, attractive women with children who were on welfare would be more likely to be intrigued by the idea of becoming members of a magical, secretive group where they were very important. By 1997, Colin's church had 17 members. And in July, he persuaded several of them to move with him to Kidwelly, Wales, and to bring their children with them. A cute little town that was a lot cheaper to live in than London. A cult member named Sandra Iveson actually moved to Kidwelly first, followed by Colin and his wife, Elaine. Let's meet his associates now, beginning with Elaine. Like we said above, Elaine grew up in East London. She had a variety of occult tattoos, an eye of Horus on her arm, a pentagram above some Egyptian script on her leg, Tutankhamun, the Egyptian pharaoh, on her back, another phrase in Egyptian that she would later claim she didn't understand, tattooed on her body. That's cool. When asked by a jury if she'd ever been to Egypt at her trial, she said she would have gone, but she just didn't visit because of the heat. All those Egyptian tattoos, but no real interest in going to Egypt. She also told the court that she liked ancient Egyptians because they were good to their slaves. Okay. I mean, they still had slaves, but okay. Back to Batley's associates. Batley's other main associate was a woman named Shelley Millar, who would be 35 when she was tried in March of 2011, making her 21 when she moved to Kidwelly. Like Elaine, Shelley had an eye of Horus tattoo on her arm. And their last associate was a woman named Jackie Marlene, Annabelle's mom. 42 at the time of her trial, making her 28 when she moved with her 2 young daughters to Wales. Jackie grew up in the Poplar area of East London. Like the others, she sported an eye of Horus tattoo on her arm. She also had a figurine of a cat goddess in her home, plus a drawing of the mask of Tutankhamun and one of the hawk-headed Egyptian god Horus. And the relationship between all these idiots was messy and complicated. Elaine would tell the court that while she and Jackie Marlene had been involved in threesomes, many, she and Marlene had a lesbian fling together as well. She also found out later that her husband and Marlene had been having a long-term affair behind her back. So she was, she knew her husband was fucking like Marlene a lot, but didn't know that they were also fucking sometimes when they wouldn't tell her they were fucking. That discovery was made when Marlene sent him a birthday card with the words "to my husband" on it to upset her. But while upset about this, that did not end Colin and Elaine's relationship. Colin and Elaine were practicing some version of polyamory, clearly. On one occasion, he had sent a photo of her to the Reader's Wives section of a pornographic magazine, which led to them meeting other couples for group activities. So they had long been seeing other people. Elaine was just mad that she wasn't always invited to participate in the sex party with Colin and Jackie. Now in Wales, all these sex-crazy occultists are living in the same cul-de-sac together. Colin's home was known as the Temple, the place where they would all frequently meet. With the torn and ragged England flag pinned outside and 2 Rottweiler dogs leaping at the door. Dogs named Sekhmet, after the Egyptian lion-headed goddess associated with war, pestilence, and flames, also known as the Eye of the Sun, the Mistress of Dread, a bloodthirsty goddess who once attempted to destroy humankind. So that's a cool name for a dog. And Toots was the other dog. Sekhmet and Toots. Toots, of course, short for Tutankhamun. I'm probably not saying that right. It's like Tutankhamun. Many neighbors would later say that they steered clear of the home, even if they didn't know what was happening inside. Neighbors would also remember a van showing up several times a year or more, whereupon the household would bounce out for France. They assumed the group was selling tobacco and porn over there, and no idea what made them assume that. They're taking off in a van again for France, huh? Clearly. Clearly, they're selling cigarettes and titty mags. I mean, that's what I would do. I mean, what else would you do if you're heading to France in a van? Locals were occasionally shocked by the group's behavior outside the home, but it seems these instances were rare. Once, a local Kidwelly woman named Cecilia Dawson and said she saw Elaine Batley and another woman touching each other in a sexual manner in the local supermarket. Cecilia and her husband often wondered how Colin and Elaine made their money. It didn't seem to work. But then they'd have elaborate parties complete with hours-long firework displays. Those must have cost a lot of money, but where did they get it? Inheritance? Another neighbor, John Wheatland, who lived next door to Colin's temple, claimed that one day while working out in his garden, he saw a girl in her early teens, quote, done up to look like a film star, who then approached him and asked him whether or not he wanted to have sex. Also stated that he often heard somebody crying in that house at night. But he apparently did not report any of this to the authorities, which is fucking weird. If you don't already know, if a girl in her young teens just randomly asks you if you want to fuck her, and you're a grown-ass man, she's probably being sexually abused. And you're going to want to call that in, especially if you know where she lives. Let authorities, social services, know what's happening, and hope that they investigate. Also be on high alert regarding what the hell is going on in the house she lives in. Maybe pay attention to see if you hear people fucking crying night after night. Find some more evidence of wrongdoing to report. Now let's return to Jackie Marlene. She brought her daughters with her, Annabelle and Olivia. Annabelle was 7, while Olivia, her half-sister, just 2. They first moved into a house a couple miles away from the cul-de-sac because it was cheaper, and Annabelle hated it. The walls and floors were rotting. It was freezing nearly all of the time. Right away, she wanted to leave. She'd hear Jackie get phone calls from David, her father, but Jackie would never let her talk to him. She missed her aunts and her grandparents. Though she had Alan, it was obvious Jackie did not want him around anymore because he was not into Colin's bullshit. Jackie recommended that Alan go find work, maybe abroad. And eventually Alan did leave, and he would never return. And Annabelle's only real ally was now gone. After several weeks in Wales, Annabelle would meet Colin for the first time. One night, Jackie woke her up, brought her downstairs. This is going to be so creepy. Barefoot in a flimsy nightgown, Annabelle follows her mom. Right, she's 7 years old. And in the darkness of the living room, she could just make out a man seated in a dark purple armchair. "Come here," he commanded. Annabelle went over, hesitating as her mother now kneeled by the man's side. Colin now told Annabelle that her family had come to Kidwelly to be part of something very special. "This is where your life in the church begins," he said, adding that it was going to be difficult. It was going to be a difficult path. She would need to find her way to the palace to avoid the eternal abyss. It was important, he said, that she learned what was expected of her and what she could do to make her path true to thy own will. He told her that the church would guide her, but she would have to ultimately make her own way and choose carefully. And then he just kept on spewing more dumb shit drivel made up by a sadistic, hedonist, trust fund motherfucker. His speech went on and on and on. Annabelle had to fight to stay awake. She tried to keep her eyes open. She wanted so badly to go back to bed. Finally, Colin made a gesture. So quick, Annabelle almost missed it. He moved a hand towards his crotch, pulled down the waistband of his tracksuit, and then Annabelle's mother, Jackie, bent over his lap, started bobbing up and down. Yep, she is sucking his dick, to be clear, directly in front of her 7-year-old daughter. Like it was normal. Just no big deal. Do what thou wilt. Annabelle had no idea what was going on at first, but she was terrified. Colin then told her to come closer. She shouldn't be frightened, he said. The only thing she had to fear was failing to fulfill her own will and failing to reach the palace. Then he told her in a voice less like a request and more like a command to step forward. She was the chosen one. He pulled her towards him, hooking an arm behind her knees. She almost fell over, but when she regained her footing, she now saw her mother definitely had Colin's dick in her mouth. Annabelle froze. With a low laugh, Colin now told her that when her period started, he would, quote, have her. And her mom didn't flinch. Just kept on sucking, and not in a cool Timesuck way. Annabelle didn't even know what a period was at this time. And then after all that bullshit, he let her go back to bed. And she was confused and terrified. She was now afraid of Colin coming back, especially because Jackie was almost never around to look after her. Annabelle had already started school in Kidwelly, but now she wanted to go live with her dad. She informed Jackie of this, who said that she would arrange it. Annabelle was surprised about that. Surprised when he left the house. But then instead of taking her to her actual father, she brought her, of course, to Colin, who told her that her dad would not look after her the way her mom would. Had he even visited her in Wales? When was the last time she'd even seen him? Did she really think he was a good man? If Annabelle was confident in her answers, Colin said they would get in the car right now and he would drive her to London. But Annabelle felt paralyzed. She couldn't move. Didn't sound like a genuine offer. It felt like a trick, a trap. He asked her if she wanted to go again, and this time she shook her head no. Colin smiled at her and left, with Jackie obediently trailing behind him. Annabelle was confused. She'd sincerely meant to leave. She'd wanted to be in London with her father, but Colin had convinced her to stay and made it seem like it was her choice. After a year of living in Wales, Annabelle and her mom moved into the cul-de-sac in Kidwelly directly next to Colin and close to other cult members. However, this new house was not much nicer than the old one. Dirty brown wallpaper peeled off the walls. There weren't any carpets, just bare boards, even concrete in places. Everything was dark or rotting. Still, things seemed a little better. Colin's wife, Elaine, was friendly, cooked delicious meals, and the Batleys' youngest child, a daughter named Hope, became Annabelle's good friend. Hope had long, honey blonde hair and a room crowded with toys. Colin gave her everything she wanted. She had dozens of My Little Ponies, stuffed animals, and Barbies. Her closet overflowed with brand new clothes. Gifts to keep her quiet about him raping her? Not sure. There's no mention of him molesting his daughter Hope, but based on who he is, I would be fucking shocked if that didn't happen. Annabelle also met Sandra, who lived across the road, and there was Shelley, who lived down at the other end of the cul-de-sac. Annabelle didn't care for Shelley, thought she was mean and bossy. There were other members of the group who did not live close by, but commuted every day as though they were heading to a job. Orla, a short lady who had 2 elementary school-age daughters named Millie and Fiona. They also had a brother, Thomas, who was about 5 years older than Annabelle. There was also Griff, a tall man with a scraggly beard who worshipped Colin. Griff's son, Pete, was cognitively disabled, but very sweet. He didn't seem to understand things like competition. When he played with other kids, made him happiest to see them win. Annabelle was happily surprised that there were so many other kids around. It meant that there were more adults she could ask for help when her own mother wouldn't feed her or wash her clothes, which was the norm. She also enjoyed spending holidays with this big group, at least at this age she did. The Batleys hosted gatherings on Christmas and Easter, serving big roasts followed by homemade cakes. In the summer, Colin sometimes rented a big bouncy castle, put on barbecues. But his favorite holiday was, I bet you can guess, Halloween. Every year, Colin would throw a massive party. His entire house would get decked out, fake spiderwebs, bats dangling from the door frames, fake blood on the walls, massive skeleton hanging from the ceiling like a disco ball. There was music and dancing, and the kids were allowed to stay up late, although there was no drinking. That was one of the church's rules. No alcohol. Ever. Do what thou wilt, but don't you ever fucking drink or do drugs. The church still didn't really interest Annabelle, nor did it interest the other kids. They didn't really understand the doctrine their parents often talked about. But they knew it had something to do with things Colin put in each of their homes. A gold mask of a man with a long beard, pictures of people in white robes with dog faces and bird heads, and lots of hieroglyphics. Another one of the church's rules was that you could never turn your backs on the sacred objects. So if you had to leave a room, you had to walk out backwards. Do what thou wilt, but do not ever turn your back on my silly idols. Members also weren't allowed to swear, mix with non-members outside of... The swear thing's pretty funny. Suck my dick, suck my penis! Now! I will not call it a cock, because that is profane. They were not allowed to mix with non-members outside of gatherings, Colin. Go into bedrooms belonging to members of the opposite sex, or look Colin directly in the eye. He said if you stared into his eyes too long, It would be like directly looking into the abyss because he's so powerful. If you haven't looked up Colin Batley yet, you should. He is pathetic. Truly a goofy-looking motherfucker. About as handsome as, Aleister Crowley was, which is not handsome at all. Colin honestly looks like a guy who would be cast as henchman number 4 or creepy guy in the cabin number 1. Fucking wild man hiding under the stairs number 3 in some kind of like B horror movie. He would play maybe the killer's dopey brother in a slasher flick. Knowing what he looks like makes what he pulled off just extra perplexing. Also, so many rules. Do what thou wilt, JK. Do what I wilt, and fuck what you wilt. There's a lot of rules. Everyone in the strange little cult had to do whatever Colin said naturally. If he said tea, someone would instantly, wordlessly, pop up and grab him a cup. Jackie especially loved to serve him. And of course, the gods he represented. In the morning, she would spend around an hour in her room kneeling naked before a number of dark metal statues of Egyptian gods. In the evening, she would leave Annabelle and Olivia still a toddler, alone while she went next door to suck her master's dick, penis, no swearing, or do whatever else he wanted. Indeed, all of the women seemed to love serving Colin. Many of them had gotten multiple Egyptian-themed tattoos per his requests, or commands, really. The color of the tattoo would symbolize one's rank in the church. Dark mauve, as Jackie had, meant she was very high-ranking. Whoa, what an honor. Still, being a high-ranking member of a cult almost no one cared about did not mean she got to control things like her own finances. Instead, when she would get her welfare check from the government, she would give it directly to Colin, who would then pay her rent and give her £50 to spend on whatever she wanted every 2 weeks. £25 a week. That doesn't go very far. He didn't just control Jackie's finances, he controlled all of their finances, and they allowed this in part because they were scared. Colin continually told them that they were merely part of a much larger church. He implied there was some kind of conflict. Other parts of the church were run by powerful people who could hurt, kill members if they strayed too far from Colin. Mysterious cult assassins that no one ever sees but me. Man, what a dumb lie to pull off for so long. But, there's also, there's a lot of gullible people when it comes to shit like this, unfortunately. Annabelle, when she was still quite young, decided to rebel against Colin's rules one day. She skipped school to hang out with a non-church friend named Lily. And when Colin found out, he beat her palms with a hard leather slipper. That's a strange beating. I had not heard of that one before. At the end of the group's second summer in Wales, September of 1998, Colin decided it was time for everyone to take a vacation. He had all of his followers pile into 3 cars, and they drove to the eastern coast of England, took the ferry across the English Channel, and camped in an RV next to Euro Disney in France. And they would repeat this trip every summer. Following year, in 1999, according to one newspaper source, Colin was jailed for a string of perverted sex attacks. Unclear what those acts were, but that does not surprise me. Evidently, he was not jailed for long because when Annabelle was 11, around 2001, her so-called tests began. Get ready to be outraged. It was a beautiful day in July. Like he had in previous summers, Colin had rented a bouncy castle for kids and set it up in his backyard. And after playing in the sun for hours, Annabelle found herself overheating. Sweating and dizzy, she went inside her house to her bedroom where she lay down on her bed and closed her eyes. Then a minute or so later, she felt another presence in the room. Colin. He asked her why she was staying inside on a day like this, and Annabelle replied that she was too hot. Like usual, Colin was wearing tracksuit bottoms and a soccer jersey, and he was rank with the smell of cigarette smoke. Suddenly, with no warning, he reached forward, pushed Annabelle down onto the bed. Then he pushed himself between her legs, putting an arm over her chest to stop her from getting up. Then he pulled her shorts and underwear off, and he raped her. Pain seized her body. She squirmed, and Colin did not stop. Of course, finally, when he was done, he pushed himself off of her and said, "I told you I'd have you." And then this sadistic pedophile just casually walked out of the room. And now I wish he was in a horror movie. I wish he was a character that the killer immediately decapitated with a machete or something. Not knowing what else to do, Annabelle stumbled downstairs, soon began to play with other children again. Her world is so insular and fucked up. She has, watched her mom suck this guy's dick since she was 7. Seen him fuck other cult members by now, what they have done in front of children. She doesn't really understand what just happened to her. She honestly doesn't even comprehend that she has just been raped. The next day, Colin appears at her house, this time with rolls and rolls of green and cream striped wallpaper. He said he was going to redo her house, which he kind of did, even though he did a half-assed job, didn't bother to strip off the old wallpaper. Just kind of slathered glue on top of the new shit, went to town, lots of lumps and stuff, whatever. Jackie had just put Olivia down for the night, and now she disappears over to Colin's house to go play PlayStation. That's cool. Just leaves her, daughter alone with this guy, knowing what he's going to do. And, knowing what he had already done to her. Soon, Colin was telling Annabelle how she pleased the gods, how the gods told him things directly, and they had told him that she was one of the protected ones. I thought she was the chosen one, but she's something special. He said it was vital that she exercised nothing but pure will. Everything else was a restriction that could lead to eternal pain in the abyss. He told her that notions of sin were just societal constructs invented to restrict and oppress mankind. And if she believed in sin, she would never be led into one of the palace's 4 gates. And the palace, it's some kind of heaven, I think. I've read a bunch of passages Crowley wrote about the palace, like, there was no more knowledge, there was no more bliss, there was no more power, there was no more beauty. For this is the palace of understanding, for thou art one of the primeval things. Even in context, I still don't fully comprehend what the fuck he's talking about. Just some arrogant asshole pontificating about all this, drug and ecstasy-fueled vision stuff. I classify Crowley now in the same category as Madame Blavatsky, founder of Theosophy. Theosophy, the lema, their quote-unquote teachings, are written much more poorly than those of ancient religions. And since they were not written a few thousand years ago, there's no excuse for them to be so confusing. Writing has come a long way in the last couple of millennia. Thelema teachings read like a bad sci-fi or fantasy novel with a very convoluted plot. Not very well thought out and constructed characters. Its believers remind me of lovers of certain shitty modern art installations, where people are just so desperate to look smart, right? That they assign all of this deep meaning to some shit like a fucking bunch of old soup cans glued together that kind of look like a stick figure. Oh, how it perfectly illustrates the eternal class struggle of humanity. How it can finally be eradicated through return to a stateless agrarian society. No, motherfucker. It's just shitty sculpture made out of some cans of tomato soup. All it symbolizes is a lack of dedication to becoming an accomplished artist. Mini rant over now. Colin tells 11-year-old Annabelle that she will never become a priestess if she doesn't pass her tests. She'll never be able to show other people the way. Finally, he brings her into her mother Jackie's bedroom, asks her how she felt about the day before. Annabelle, who is scared, tells him that, what she thought he wanted to hear, that it was fine. He reiterates again that she's very special to the church, and he asks her if she wants to make progress in her journey. And again, knowing what he wants her to say, she says yes. In order to make progress, Colin said, there were tests she had to complete, tests found within the book of the law. And Annabelle now agrees to take these tests. She didn't even realize what the tests were until he had already started having sex with her again. This time, he forces her to give him oral sex before vaginally penetrating her. Afterwards, he congratulates her on fulfilling her path, saying she was destined to become a priestess and a goddess now. And tests like these would continue every night for the next 8 weeks. Every time he came over, Jackie would leave, usually to go play on Colin's PlayStation like the fucking awesome mom she is. As August rolls into September and Annabelle starts senior school, aka middle/high school, Colin keeps pursuing her. There's nowhere for her to be safe, even if she's hanging out with Colin's daughter, Hope. He has no qualms about pulling her out of a play date and into his room for a quick little sexual escapade. I bought a digital copy of Aleister Crowley's The Book of the Law, by the way, and to be clear, it doesn't say anything about tests that involve kids getting fucked or having to suck somebody's dick. Colin must have had a different version. Some kind of do what thou wilt and fuck as many kids as possible. Special gold-plated comes with a free scarab beetle amulet, limited edition or something. Soon after 8 weeks of sex, the meetings began for Annabelle. All church members, including children who had been fucked a whole bunch, I guess, had to congregate at Colin's house at noon on Sundays to read from the Book of the Law. People would trade off reading until they had covered all 3 sections, and then the rest of the church members were allowed to ask Colin questions about what they had just heard. Then Colin would ramble on, talking about the gods, the meaning of certain passages, the palace, the abyss, anything else until about 7 p.m. Members were also made to memorize passages of the Book of the Law, like this one from the beginning. Had the manifestation of suit, the unveiling of the company of heaven. Every man and every woman is a star. Every member is infinite. There is no difference. Colin insisted that they were all equal, all the same. But of course that was bullshit. He was the most special. He was on top. No one else came close or really mattered and only existed to serve him, largely sexually. Also, other members were ranked. Everyone was different. Underneath Colin at the top was his wife, Elaine, then Jackie, then Sandra, Shelley, so on. Occasionally a question would come up that Colin would refuse to answer, citing church secrecy. Great way to dodge questions you don't understand, so you don't have to look stupid or look like a hypocrite. Other times he forewent the Q&A session entirely, used the meetings as an opportunity to call out those who had misbehaved during the week, in particular the children. He picked on his own sons a lot, calling them gay and dirty in front of everyone. Do what thou wilt, but don't be gay, like Aleister Crowley was, the dude who wrote all this shit. Soon, Colin would start holding new special ceremonies, Thanksgiving ceremonies, he called them. They'd happen every few months to thank the gods for what the gods had provided for them. For the Thanksgiving ceremonies, everyone had to wear robes, full-length gowns with hoods. Naturally, they were all naked underneath. Coat, coat, coat. The color of your gown depended on your rank in the church. Lighter was lower, darker was higher. In these ceremonies, they would stand in rows, fanning out like a pyramid. Oh, how cool. Colin would stand at the front, right, the pinnacle, presiding over a table covered by a purple sheet which held silver candlesticks, a silver goblet of red wine, a silver plate with brown bread soaked in wine. Like in a Catholic communion, they would take turns going up to the altar for a sip of wine and a bite of bread. So, of course, if you missed any of these ceremonies, it jeopardized your path. It would emerge during Colin's trial in 2011 that he had been reported to the Carmarthenshire Social Services in 2002 by a concerned relative. Carmarthenshire is the county that Kidwelly's in. I'll do my best to pronounce it. She said that Batley had been sexually abused by his own father and that history is about to repeat itself. But that warning went unheeded, allowing Batley and his cult to continue to prey on youngsters week after week, month after month, for another 8 years. And in fairness to the social workers in Carmarthenshire, you can't go investigate someone just because a relative calls and tells you that that someone is going to molest others because they were once molested themselves. If that's all the evidence you have, that would be super fucked up, to go re-victimize somebody just because they were once, victimized themselves. Hey, we're here to make sure you're not molesting those kids. What? Who said I was molesting these kids? Oh, your grandma. What? That's not true. She didn't say that you were. She has no evidence that you were. She hasn't seen anything or heard anything. But she did say that you were molested as a kid, so, we gotta assume you caught the pedo bug. And we need to make sure you don't spread it, you fucking creep. That would be just a little bit messed up to do. Around 2004, when Annabelle is now 14, Colin introduces a new round of tests. Oh boy. Now he said he was teaching her the ways of the Scarlet Woman. And who exactly is the Scarlet Woman? Well, according to dictionary.com, a Scarlet Woman is a sexually promiscuous woman, especially a prostitute or a woman who commits adultery. The term comes from the Old Testament's description of the whore of Babylon. When John introduces the whore in the book of Revelation, he tells us, "Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, 'Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who is seated upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and with the wine of whose fornication the dwellers on earth have become drunk.' And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast which was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and bedecked with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her fornication. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly." But just because the passage describes her as a rich, promiscuous lady does not mean the passage is necessarily about sexual sin. Indeed, fornication in Scripture often interpreted as being a symbol of false religion, a lack of fidelity to God, the God who created heaven and earth. Many religious folk think the whore Babylon is a metaphor for the pagan Roman Empire, not an individual lady. But other people have not taken it that way. Especially not people excited by the concept of a supernaturally sexy woman. Hail Josephina! Aleister Crowley would seize on this figure, renaming her Babylon, but spelled B-A-B-A-L-O-N, making her a goddess within his pseudo-religion of the lema. He said her existence and the spelling of her name were revealed to him in a vision he wrote about in his book, The Vision and the Voice. A book about 2 visions he supposedly had. One while he was in Mexico in 1900, and another in Algeria in 1909. Dude had so much time to travel around the world, do so many drugs, see visions, write about them. Fucking trust fund money must have been so much fun, so much coke. He did do a lot of coke, actually. Babylon, also known as the Scarlet Woman, or the Great Mother, or the Mother of Abominations. In her most abstract form, Babylon represents the female sexual impulse, and Crowley's ideal of the liberated woman. He wrote, let me get some mood music. Babylon, as the Great Mother, represents matter, a word which is derived from the Latin word for mother. She is the physical mother of each of us, the one who provided us with material flesh to clothe our naked spirits. She is the archetypal mother, the great yoni, the womb of all that lives to the flowing of blood. She is the great sea, the divine blood itself which cloaks the world and which courses through our veins. And she is Mother Earth, the womb of all life that we know. So that sounds kind of spooky. Along with her status as an archetype or goddess, Crowley believed that Babylon had an earthly aspect or avatar, a living woman who occupied the spiritual office of the Scarlet Woman. This office, first identified in Crowley's Book of the Law, is usually described as a counterpart to his own identification as the Great Beast. His Eve to his Adam or some shit. The role of the Scarlet Woman was to help manifest the energies of the Eon of Horus, a time period controlled by the child god, symbolized by Horus. They fucking love Horus. Crowley believed that several women in his life occupied the office of the Scarlet Woman. Rose Edith Crowley, his first wife. Some woman named Jeannie Robert Foster. Occultist Leah Herzig. Austrian violinist Lila Waddell, and several others. And while we can think that Crowley was just trying to include another figure in his cosmology that was required to have sex with him, important to note that many Victorian spiritualists and occultists were women. To see themselves reflected in his theology as complex, powerful women was important to them, good for recruiting, especially in a Christian society that aligned women either with purity and virginity or sexuality and degradation. Perhaps Crowley was just trying to give women a place of greater power in his new religion than they had in any Abrahamic religion. Perhaps he was just trying to get more women into his group so he could fuck them. Colin, though, not interested in any notion of female power. He focused almost entirely on the overtly sexual nature of Crowley's writing when it came to women, on passages like the following one from Crowley's The Book of Thoth, where he describes Babylon's daughter. And this palace is nothing but the body of a woman, proud and delicate, and beyond imagination fair. She is like a child of 12 years old. She has very deep eyelids and long lashes. Her eyes are closed or nearly closed. It's impossible to say anything about her. She is naked. Her whole body is covered with fine gold hairs. That are the electric flames, which are the spears of mighty and terrible angels whose breastplates are the scales of her skin, and the hair of her head that flows down to her feet is the very light of God himself. Creepy that Aleister references a 12-year-old girl's body there. Okay. A day after Colin told Annabelle he wanted her to learn the way of the Scarlet Woman, Jackie informed Annabelle that Colin was coming over for the night. So that's terrifying. And now he wants to see them both. And if you're thinking that some even more fucked up stuff is about to happen that's even worse than the stuff I've already mentioned, oh, you are correct. At 8 o'clock, both mother and daughter put on robes. Jackie's is silky, a sort of dressing gown. Annabelle's is fluffy and blue, maybe more like a bathrobe. In the living room, Jackie begins taking the cushions off the couch, putting them on the floor. She tells Annabelle, her 14-year-old daughter, to go upstairs and take her underwear off. About a half hour later, Colin arrives. Immediately, he lays down on the cushions on the floor, tells them both that they are going to do something related to the 3 ordeals. More bullshit from the Book of Law that Colin is interpreting to suit his deplorable desires. He asks them if they have any requests. Annabelle soon realizes this is their time to ask him for money or household goods. Jackie asks for new shoes for Olivia, a litter tray for the cat, a Siamese named Sakara. Then Jackie starts to perform oral sex on Colin. Colin tells Annabelle to join her mother. He is an evil motherfucker. And soon both women, mother and daughter, are simultaneously pleasuring him. And he has sex with both of them for about a half hour. From then on, sex with both of them would be a fixture in Annabelle's life. And it gets worse. About 2 months later, Jackie informs Annabelle that Colin found her too uptight sexually and that he had requested that Jackie go down on her own daughter, just 2 of them, before Colin comes over to fuck them both. And that's what happens. Annabelle feels sick, but as always, she tells Colin that she enjoyed it. She felt like she didn't have a choice. My God, I hope Annabelle has gotten the most therapy about all of this. A few months later, Jackie gets pregnant. The father, of course, is Colin. And now he doesn't let this new development slow down his do-what-thou-wilt lifestyle. He buys an RV, tells his wife Elaine and daughter Hope to take weekend trips to nearby Tenby, a preposterously adorable little seaside town in Wales. When I watched a travel video to get the pronunciation, after about 2 minutes, I was like, I need to live here. Sending his wife and daughter away gave Colin more time to focus on fucking other members of the group, including Orla's young teen daughters, Fiona and Millie. Millie started staying at his house when Colin's wife and daughter were gone, becoming, in Annabelle's words, a bit like his second wife. So his sex slave. One weekend when his wife and daughter are away, he introduces another rule. All the girls have to wear short skirts when Elaine and Hope are gone for the weekend. As the gods decree. The next week, Colin introduces yet another rule. All the girls have to wear makeup like Egyptian goddesses when my wife and child are away. Not just teenagers, but also the women. So just picture a group of 14 to 40-year-old women all wearing short skirts, heavy Egyptian-style eyeliner, fawning over, sexually pleasuring a wildly unattractive man in his early 40s who looks like some sort of mad scientist, evil henchman, missing most of his front teeth with breath that smells like a fucking ashtray mixed with a butthole. Actually, don't picture that. No one should have to picture that. But that is what was happening. Oh, yeah, it's party time! Oh, ball and chains away! Ha-ha! I guess that song doesn't really work, since he was the only boy, really being back in town, getting all the sexual action in his cult. At least at this point. The women and many of the girls saw these weekends as opportunities to gain Colin's favor, to rise in rank in his shitty, pathetic little cult. They all began to compete for his affection, all except Annabelle. She just wished that he would leave her alone. But he is sexually obsessed with her. He became more demanding with her in the bedroom, putting her in all sorts of different positions, demanding that she look at him during sex, demanding that she kiss him. Other times he'll bite her, telling her she has to learn how to endure pain in order to become this Scarlet Woman. He just wants her to be a living fuck doll. A few weeks later, he informs Annabelle that he had found a boyfriend for her, Orla's son, Thomas, 5 years her senior at 19. Thomas was tall and thin with a shaved head and thick eyebrows, and he lived at Shelley's house. He was a devoted member of the church, spent all of his time in lectures and meetings when he wasn't stocking shelves at the nearby Asda grocery store for minimum wage. Minimum wage that was being handed over to Colin. Colin informed Annabelle that she had to have sex with Thomas that night and without protection. So she does. Shelley shows her right up to Thomas's room. Colin has told her the plan too. And why did Colin set all this up? Well, Jackie had gotten pregnant. And though everyone claimed that her estranged boyfriend Alan had returned to the group for just one night to sleep with her, they knew it was Colin's baby. Now Colin needed insurance if Annabelle was to also get pregnant. Someone he could blame her pregnancy on that wasn't him. So clearly his wife Elaine doesn't know exactly what's going on with him. Thomas himself had no idea that this is what's happening. He also has no idea his girlfriend doesn't want to have sex with him at all. All he knows is that he had to ask Colin if he can have sex with Annabelle, often in front of other members of the cult. On October 5th, 2005, Jackie has Colin's baby, little boy named Amos. Everyone knew that Amos meant in their occult speak language, son of God, so it was clear whose baby it was. And now after the newness of having a baby wears off for Jackie, who would rather be doing cool shit or cult shit, than looking after her kid, Annabelle will be charged with raising her mom's baby. By the time she's 16, she's effectively raising two kids, 1-year-old Amos, who they soon start to call Moses, and 11-year-old Olivia. She'd never even been to a pub or gone to the movie theater. She'd never been to a proper restaurant, gone inside a store by herself. Still, she manages to pass her GCSEs, General Certificate of Secondary Education, kind of like a GED here in the States, and wants to become a caterer now, wants to go to catering school. But Colin says no to her catering school dreams because the school was too far away from the cul-de-sac. So instead, Annabelle applies to a local beautician school and gets accepted. Colin's happy about this. The longer Annabelle is in school, the longer Jackie can get government benefits for raising her, which she is not doing, clearly. At Julie's beauty salon, where she will soon work, Annabelle will spend long days waxing, giving massages, manicures, and pedicures. Also allowed to keep her tips. First time she's able to have money that Colin doesn't know about. She doesn't talk to anyone there about all the weird shit Colin is doing to her, as he had instructed her to do, or not do. The gods would not be pleased. She would be sent to the abyss. At this point, things seem to be winding down somewhat, though, within the church. Ceremonies have stopped completely. Colin doesn't seem to be interested in running meetings for the church anymore. There's hope that the madness might end soon for Annabelle, but he's not actually done. Now, there was something even darker he's scheming on. Instead of filling everyone's time with meetings, which generated a lot of recognition for Colin, but not very much money, now he has people working for the church directly. He has Shelley and Jackie leave the cul-de-sac on Fridays, returning on Mondays. Nobody knows where they go, not even Annabelle, who will stay behind and raise Jackie's children, her siblings. A couple weeks after Annabelle starts at the beauty salon, Colin informs her that somebody is coming to see her that night. Somebody new. Annabelle is shocked when she finds out who it is. It's Pete, the sweet, cognitively disabled kid she had played with as a child. Colin told her to give him oral sex, then normal sex. Pete was the same age as Annabelle, but seemed so much younger, around 10, didn't seem right to have sex with him. But then the doorbell rang and her mom, Jackie, handed Annabelle a condom and she was holding a video camera. Colin has asked me to record it, she said. Sick fuck. She didn't seem bothered by any of this, right? Any kind of sex with anyone is a fair game, I guess, in Jackie's deranged, pathetic mind. In Jackie's bedroom, Pete strips, giggling nervously, and Annabelle gives him oral sex, hating every minute of it. After a while, Pete says he can't do it with the camera on. He hesitates, then puts his pants on, leaves the room. Annabelle is relieved that it's over, but worried about this new phase in the sexual relationships of the group. Before, it had just been Colin, and then Jackie, and then Thomas, to cover for Colin if Annabelle got pregnant, but now it's Pete. Who's next? How many more will there be? How many more people will Annabelle have to have sex without a choice? So fucking many, sadly. Like almost 2,000. Not kidding. At 17 years old, Annabelle tries to commit suicide by swallowing 24 paracetamol pills, aka acetaminophen, a common painkiller. She'd never been to a doctor in Wales, didn't even know the pills were dangerous until Moses was born and her mom told her to keep the pills away from him. In the bottom bunk of the bed she shares with Olivia, Annabelle takes the pills and waits. But then it's morning, she wakes up. Olivia's waking her up. It had not worked. Soon after, Colin confronted her. He knew about the pills, he said, and Annabelle thought the gods must have told him. He really is powerful. What she didn't know was that Jackie had found the pill packets in the trash and handed them over to Colin and talked to him about it. Just a couple of months later, Annabelle will have a new reason to live, but it's a tragic one. One day, still working at Julie's Beauty, another girl notices she's sick and asks her if she might be pregnant. Annabelle shook her head. She thought she just had an infection. Uncharacteristically, Colin had agreed with her and given her some pills to help clear it up. But after 6 doses, she still didn't feel better. Julie, the owner of the store, took her to get a pregnancy test now, and the result was clear. 2 thick lines. She is pregnant, but she doesn't want to be. She still hoped that she would have a life outside of the group, that she would be able to grow up and make something of herself, get away from these fucking weirdos. She's still a child herself, just 17. That night, she tells Colin the surprise that flickered across his face was unmistakable, even though he said immediately that he already knew. But Annabelle knew that he didn't know. And if he was lying about that, telling her the gods had told him when he clearly had no idea, what else would he lie about? But there was no time to keep following that train of thought. Colin told her that she now needed to have an abortion, and Annabelle was relieved. But then, a little while later, he comes back to the house, asks Annabelle what she wants to do, and Annabelle is confused. Hadn't they just decided to get an abortion? Now when she says, well, yeah, I want to get an abortion, Colin explodes. He says, this is a child from the gods, and if she kills it, she will be a murderer. So Annabelle agrees. Now Colin becomes sexually insatiable with her. He wants to have sex with her all the time. He says he's, quote, getting energy from the baby. This fucking piece of shit. 2 weeks later, he informs Thomas that Thomas is the father of Annabelle's baby, which of course he is not. His daughter Hope does not take the news well. She knows who the true father of Annabelle's baby is, her own father. The baby will be her childhood best friend's kid and her own half-sibling. Around this time, Damien, Colin's oldest son, moves into Annabelle's house. Colin apparently, quote, didn't like his sons living under his roof. Dude was seriously threatened by other men, so typical of these loser cult leaders. Annabelle rarely saw Damien, despite him living with her. He would wake up, go straight to his job at the supermarket, then return home, just kind of be by himself. Still, Annabelle had to clean up after him, make his food, along with her 2 siblings. With so much going on at the house and her own pregnancy, Annabelle decides not to return to beauty school in September of 2007. That fall, she has her first pregnancy scan on her 18th birthday. Finds out she's having a girl, and she is devastated. Now she worries, what is Colin going to do to her child? She attempts suicide again by starting to slit her wrists, but immediately gets scared, bandages up the wounds. Then she notices that Colin didn't say anything about the suicide attempt. Clearly he didn't know. What else didn't he know? Maybe the gods weren't actually talking to him. Maybe they never were, and he's full of shit. February 1st, 2008, Annabelle makes a grisly discovery. 9 months along in her pregnancy, she discovers that Damien, Colin's eldest son, has hanged himself in his bedroom. He was naked, suspended by a belt hooked over the knob of a dresser. Screaming, she wakes up Jackie, who tells her to go next door, where she finds the cult in a normal midweek scene. Colin, Shelley, Sandra, and Thomas playing darts in the kitchen. Okay. Annabelle tells them what she has found, and the room explodes into chaos. Her mom, Jackie, calls the police and an ambulance. Then, for some reason, she tells Annabelle to say that if the police ask, Damien had just been staying with them for a few days, when in reality, he'd been there for months. An ambulance arrives, takes the body away in a navy blue zip-up bag. In the early stages, authorities link Damien's death to a rash of teen suicides that has swept through their area of Wales. 14 young people from the area had killed themselves in the previous year, supposedly inspired by a viral post on Facebook. But Damien was 25, not a teenager. Also wasn't any note in his room like there had been with the other victims, and he didn't have social media. But that's what they blame it on. Following day, Colin tells everyone that Damien had to die. It was the will of the gods. But once again, Annabelle remembers how shocked and upset he had been the day before. That didn't add up with what he was saying now. Just then, something distracted her. A sharp pain in her belly. She was going into labor. For the next 3 days of the hospital, she had vivid hallucinations that Damien's spirit was in the room with her. She was so brainwashed by all of Colin's bullshit that she thought the gods had put a curse on her for not saving him. In reality, she had just had a bad case of the mumps, treatable with antibiotics. By the 4th day, Thomas arrived to bring her some fresh clothes. He reported that Colin had scheduled Damien's funeral for February 14th, Valentine's Day, so that when everyone else in the world will be thinking about love, the group will be thinking about Damien. It all sounded morbid to Annabelle. Following the convictions of the cult members, one neighbor would later recall, the day of his son's funeral, he was sitting outside his house laughing and joking like he didn't have a care in the world. Just a true sociopath. Annabelle's baby was born February 7th, 2008. Colin named her Beelzebub, Anubis, whore of Babylon, Hecate, Lilith, Eileen Warnos, Hitler, Satan, Catherine, Angel of Death, the great harlot, voodoo queen, Catherine Kimberly Dawn. No. Somehow Annabelle got to name her and just named her Emily. At least in her book, she's named Emily. I'm guessing in real life, just like a regular name. Even though Colin had done his best to control the situation, he'd forbidden her from breastfeeding, took away the 500 pounds she had been allotted from the government to buy some baby supplies, that motherfucker. Annabelle found herself feeling freer than she'd ever felt before. Now she knew that only two things mattered, her and her daughter. Meanwhile, 2 weeks after Damien's death, there was an inquest into how he died. Police recovered footage on his cell phone of him recording as he hanged himself, and they assumed it was a case of autoerotic asphyxiation gone wrong. Correct or not, the verdict made the idea of it being the God's will even more implausible to Annabelle, since it had been an accident, not anyone's desire. About 2 months after this, Thomas takes a job in 10B. Now, he's not around much anymore. And Colin starts having sex with Annabelle again, and now it's rougher. And one day, after having rough anal sex with her, Colin tells Annabelle that she needs to get a tattoo to protect her and her child. She wasn't told about the design of the tattoo or its placement, right? Shades of Keith Raniere and his branding of NXIVM members here. Before she knew it, she was signing the consent form at the tattoo parlor, and getting taken to the table, she sees the design. A huge, colorful scarab beetle with outstretched wings, and it wound up on top of her left arm. If only that tattoo protected her from being raped by a fucking psychopath. Following week, after another session of rough anal sex, Colin tells her it's time for her to start working for the church now, doing what Jackie, Shelley, Orla, and the other girls have been doing. Like he'd undoubtedly told all of them, Colin told Annabelle that her new work would show her devotion to the church, and it would set her on the path to the palace. Always talking about the path to the palace. You want to guess what it was? Yeah, sex work. One by one, Colin had introduced his female cult members to a brothel he now operated in Bristol, a 2-hour drive away. He had the older women, Shelley or Jackie, take the younger ones to buy lacy panty and bra sets along with high stiletto heels. Then they would take them to Superdrug, a health and beauty retailer, to buy black mascara, eyeliner, and red lipstick. Now Annabelle would leave her 3-month-old daughter in Colin's care, terrifying, to join them. And Orla brought her to a place in Bristol called the Paradise Lounge. A person with a huge bouffant of hair, extravagant eye makeup, and long painted nails opened the door. Took a moment for Annabelle to realize this was Fiona, Orla's teen daughter. The Paradise Lounge was not much of a lounge, just an entryway with a black desk and 2 black leather chairs. Staircase led to a mysterious second floor where Annabelle would discover several small rooms with black silk sheets. In one room, Millie, Fiona's teen sister, and Jackie were lounging on a big double bed. In another, Shelley was waiting. She gave Annabelle a handful of condoms, explained to her that her name was Camilla now here, that when men would come, the women would line up downstairs, and these men would pick who they wanted to sleep with. They would pay, 60 pounds, half for the house, half for the worker, for which they received a blowjob with a condom and sex with a condom as well, to not last more than a half an hour. They could pay for extras, 20 pounds for kissing, 20 for performing oral sex on the girls and women, and 50 for a blowjob without a condom. And after every encounter, Annabelle was supposed to text Colin hello with an added X for how many extras the customer got. Dude has the same amount of respect for women that Aleister Crowley had. 0. Jackie helped Annabelle get ready, dressing her in a pair of red panties, a lacy baby doll top. Annabelle found it hard to stand in the heels, but Jackie simply quipped, "Don't worry, you won't be spending long on your feet." Jackie again is her fucking mom. Oh, what a fun mom. I don't know what that accent was that I tried to pull off, by the way, either. That was like maybe, you know what? Maybe it was Welsh. Maybe it was a Welsh one that you've never even heard of before. Soon the doorbell rang, and it was time to go downstairs. In total, there were 6 women: Annabelle, Jackie, Shelley, Fiona, 2 others Annabelle didn't recognize. First man picks Fiona. Second picks Annabelle. Apparently he liked him young. She will have 8 clients in total that night, and it was a long night. Even when they did not have a customer, the women were not supposed to sleep. Right? The Paradise Lounge was open 24 hours a day. Typical cult leader, keep everyone exhausted and confused. By midday the next day, clients showed up again. It was a steady stream until Sunday morning. Then that night, Orla drives Annabelle back to Kidwelly. Along with the money, Annabelle has earned hundreds of pounds in cash. She would eventually earn over 3,000 pounds some weekends. Wouldn't get to keep it, though. All of it would go to Colin. And the day after she got back and handed him a big brick of cash, she had to suck his dick so he would give her diapers for Emily, that fucking piece of trash. Meanwhile, with his new cash flow, Colin is now busy fixing up his house. Oh, he's added a plush new carpet, chandelier, built-in cabinets in the kitchen and bedrooms. And he took his family on a couple vacations. How fun! Oh, and when his daughter Hope passes her driving test, he buys her a new Peugeot convertible. Holy shit, that motherfucker's evil. And what did the women Colin was pimping out think about where this money is going? Well, Colin explains that the money is not going to him. No, he's buying stuff. He's buying that stuff with other kind of money. No, he says the money is going to the church headquarters in a small town in France, the precise location of which is governed under church secrecy. The prostitution is about money either, he claims. He tells the women that they're trying to reach sacred numbers of men they need to sleep with in order to ascend to the next level. Jesus Christ. And that these numbers were 318, 618, and 918. And get this. Once you slept with 318 men, you have to go back down to 0 and work your way back up to 618. Then you go back down to 0 and work your way back up to 918. For a grand total of 1,854 men. The women and girls had to keep a tally of every man they had sex with on their phones, meaning it now became a sort of competition. Then it gets even worse. Soon, Colin begins insisting they become all-around whores now. That's his quote, all-around whores, which meant that they had to offer a variety of services. 80 pounds for anal sex now, 30 pounds for a customer to come again during the session, and 100 pounds to have sex without a condom. He doesn't give a fuck about these ladies and girls. Thankfully, Annabelle would not deal with the unprotected sex. Colin gave her a scarab beetle necklace to protect her from STDs, but she at least knew enough about the world that she knew that didn't do shit when it came to STDs at this point. So she never offered that one particular service, and Colin never seemed to realize she didn't offer it, which she found interesting. Another sign he was not communicating with the gods. He was not omnipotent. There was also another breakthrough for Annabelle that came directly from having sex with so many men. The majority of these men, unlike Colin, were nice to her when they had sex. Many of the men seemed to actually care about her, asking her what she was doing in a place like that. It was her very first customer, a man named Mike, who was maybe the kindest of all. He visited her again and again, oftentimes paying just to sit and talk to her instead of having sex. He would try to convince her to leave the brothel, come with him, and start a new and better life. When she told him he had a child, he didn't blink. Told her to bring her child with her. He would take care of them both. And while Annabelle refused, he did, however, make her think some new thoughts. All of these men were successful enough to scrounge up at least enough money to pay for sex, yet none of them talked about the gods, the palace, the abyss. They'd built lives for themselves entirely outside of the church. They told her about the outside world, and for the first time, it didn't sound scary like Colin made it out to be. It sounded liberating. But still, she wasn't ready to break out of the cult she'd grown up in, and away from the cult leader who had manipulated and groomed her since she was a very small child. The turning point regarding Annabelle wanting to get out of the group came in December of 2008, 6 months after she started working at the brothel. During this time, Emily had been raised almost entirely by Orla, taking her first steps, speaking her first words. It was unbearable. Then what would happen next was even more unbearable. Her mother, Jackie, had a regular client, a wealthy man named Clive, who liked to have threesomes. And one night, Jackie informed Annabelle that Clive wanted another girl, a third. When Annabelle got to the room, Jackie was riding Clive, this is fucking mom, and he's giving Shelley oral sex. Soon it's over, and Annabelle is relieved she didn't have to do anything. But then her mom informs her that Clive had just gone to get some more money from the ATM, and he was coming back for round 2. And in round 2, he wanted Jackie and Annabelle. And that was exactly what happened. Clive had no idea these two women were related. Annabelle felt disgusted. She realized this madness had to end. So now she starts hiding money. First, just 30 or 40 pounds from an extra she didn't tell Colin about. And the more extras he was unaware of, she knew now he was full of shit about the gods and all. The more her confidence grew, she started talking more, taking more, up to 200 pounds at a time. Still, Colin says nothing. Next, she enlists Thomas, the young man who was supposedly Emily's father, to help her. Thomas had now grown dissatisfied with the cult. He's sick of working in 10B. Colin said he couldn't quit his job, though, and he was angry. And Thomas was angrier that he had to hand all of his hard-earned cash to Colin. Now he agrees to leave with her, and Annabelle comes up with a plan. She will contact Alan, her mom's old boyfriend, her former stepdad, Olivia's father. In early January of 2009, Thomas does contact Alan over Facebook by using a computer at the local library. He finds out that he lives in Carmarthen, only about a half an hour away. Alan said they were more than welcome to stay with him and his wife as long as they wanted, and that he had always known this day would come. So Thomas and Annabelle now plan for Alan to pick them up in the early hours of the morning when nobody will be around. A Friday morning would work best, since many of the women had started going to the brothel on Thursday nights and working through the weekend. They set a date, March 13th, 2008. Annabelle now has 1,600 pounds in her escape fund. But then she gets nervous. Colin had always told her that without him, she wouldn't have protection from the gods. And there was the matter of leaving Olivia and Moses, the two children she'd essentially raised. So the day before, March 12th, she freaks out. She backs out. She wasn't quite ready. But she knew that she would escape someday. So she started taking hundreds of more pounds out of the piles of money she made at the brothel. Still, Colin does not know. Then her tally finally crept up over 1,800 men. But even though she'd reached all the magic numbers, Colin would not let her quit, and that perhaps was the final straw. Sacred number speech, just more bullshit. Finally, 2 months after she backed out of the first plan, she is truly, truly ready to leave. And on May 22nd, 2008, Annabelle quietly wakes up little Emily at 2:30 in the morning, dresses them both. They didn't have suitcases, so they couldn't bring much. Just a tote with Emily's diapers, Annabelle's passport, and 3,000 pounds. She places an envelope marked Colin on the counter. Inside it is a necklace with a scarab beetle, nothing else. Once she made it a little ways down the road, it wasn't hard to spot Alan's car. He had brought a car seat for Emily. Tearfully, the two hugged and reunited, and then Annabelle said they had to go now. About a half hour later, they pull into a small street and park next to the big house where Alan lived with his wife, Leah, and their son. She is out. Hail Nimrod! She's truly free. Next morning, Alan wakes her up and asks, "Cup of tea?" And it takes Annabelle a long moment to realize he wasn't asking her to make him a cup of tea. He is offering to make her one. No one had ever done that before for her. He also made her breakfast, a plate of toast, scrambled eggs, bacon, and fried tomatoes. No one had ever done that. Not only since she'd moved to Wales at the age of, 7? Later that day, Leah returns home with her, or actually before she was 7. Later that day, Leah returns home with her and Alan's son, Michael, and the two are just as welcoming as Alan. Then Thomas arrives 2 days later, slipping off after work. He's welcome. He reports that Colin had dealt with Annabelle's disappearance in his usual blasé manner, saying that if Annabelle thought she could live out on her own, she was welcome to try. Hope and Elaine had been more upset. Hope had called Annabelle a selfish cow for leaving. Jackie, her mother, didn't give a shit. Said nothing. Fuck her and Colin both. For $50 a week now, Thomas and Annabelle rent Alan and Leah's dining room, which they turn into a bedroom while they wait to get government-assisted council housing. Thomas goes to work while Annabelle stays at home with Alan, who is currently in between jobs. One afternoon, he offers Annabelle some Jack Daniels, and she accepts. And do not worry, he is also not a monster. This is not heading somewhere creepy. Annabelle had never drunk alcohol, and before long, she was telling Alan all about what had happened in the group, including the sexual abuse. Alan is appropriately fucking outraged. He could see with his eyes what Colin had done to her. Not only was Annabelle emaciated, but she was also deeply afraid. Annabelle was terrified that without the gods' protection, she would get hit by a bus or something if she stepped outside. Also, she'd never had an opportunity to make choices for herself. So something as simple as just going to the store and picking out a stroller would send her into like an anxiety, riddled tailspin. She hadn't been taught to trust her instincts, make basic choices, nothing. She had never been taught so much of what most of us just take for granted. By September of 2009, Annabelle and Thomas moved to a house down the road from Alan and his family. Annabelle finds the contact information for her grandparents. She hadn't seen them since she was 7. She reunites with them now, and also with her mom's two sisters, Becca and Kate. Kate even invited Annabelle and Emily to come stay with her in London. Annabelle accepts, since Thomas is so often away at work. Soon, Annabelle convinces Thomas that they should move to their own apartment in London, and finally away from Wales, they are free from Colin now, sort of. Within a month, though, Thomas says he wants to return. Their relationship had disintegrated after Annabelle found a job working at a clothes warehouse, and Thomas now began staying home with Emily. Soon, he was getting in touch with Colin. Colin told him to come back for a visit. He was so brainwashed. And in response, Annabelle kicked him out. She moved in with Kate and Kate's partner, Gavin, and that was when she finally told someone about how long the abuse had been going on, about how Colin had started to have sex with her when she was just 11 years old. Kate was horrified, but Annabelle still thought it had been her choice. That was how Colin had phrased it. Kate told her that a child couldn't choose to have sex. It was rape and wildly illegal, and Annabelle was shocked. Annabelle now has this revelation of what actually had happened to her, leads her to some deeply self-destructive behavior, including alcohol and coke abuse. Eventually, Gavin and Kate give Annabelle an ultimatum. It's the drugs or her daughter, and she chooses her daughter. She was so angry, so traumatized, but also did realize how lucky she was to be out. How lucky other people, especially her siblings, were not. She now finally decides to report Colin to the police. Annabelle goes to the police in May of 2010. After an initial interview, she goes back for a more formal taped interview with several officers. By the end of the day, they had barely scratched the surface of all that had happened in what was about to be called the Kidwelly sex cult. On day 3, there were more officers. This time, Annabelle told them about having to have sex not just with Colin, but Colin and her own mother, Jackie. The next day, she described leaving Emily when she had to go work at the brothel. By the end of the day, that day, there was enough information to make the arrests. The police would send the information to their colleagues in Wales, who would arrest Colin and Jackie the following day. Colin would be charged with more than 24 acts of sexual perversion, including 11 separate rapes, 3 indecent assaults, causing prostitution for personal gain, causing a child to have sex, and inciting a child to have sex. He was also charged with 6 counts of buggery and 4 counts of possessing indecent images of a child. Jackie was charged with 1 count of aiding and abetting rape, 1 count of causing prostitution for gain, 1 count of inciting a child to engage in sex. She was also charged with 3 separate counts of indecency with a child. But of course, both denied everything. But evidence the police would find, and additional interviews they would conduct would say differently. In one, detectives retrieved a videotape of 15-year-old Annabelle being instructed to lift up her skirt and shirt for the camera. Then other victims would come forward. In total, 5 victims would eventually testify in court that they were all lured or brought to cult members' homes where they were sexually abused. One 15-year-old girl who gave evidence described being shared like a sex toy between cult members. Like Annabelle, a second girl was raped by Batley when she was just 11. She testified sex with him was a test, and if I did not pass, I would go to the abyss. This woman was now in her 30s, meaning the abuse had started at least 10 years before Annabelle's. He was running that sexual abuse grift for a long time. Third girl also testified to being raped by Batley when she was 11 or 12 and being coerced into having sex on camera when she was 16. With this info, Elaine, Shelley, and Sandra, also now arrested. Elaine is charged with 3 counts of indecency with a child, 1 of sexual activity with a child. Shelley Millar charged with indecency with a child and inciting a child to engage in sex. Sandra Iveson charged with 1 count of indecency with a child. Finally, the trial date for all these fucking dirtbags is set for February of 2011 at Swansea Crown Court, 9 months after Annabelle first went to the police. Colin, Elaine, Shelley, Sandra would all plead not guilty. Colin would even say he had tried reading the book of the law just one time, but gave it up. Became Mormon instead. Remember, that's what they told neighbors right there. They're Mormon. The trial would begin on schedule. All of the victims were given lifelong anonymity, meaning their identities were kept completely out of the papers, as I mentioned up top. For her part, Annabelle was on the stand for 2 days, during which the defense tried to make it look like she was incapable of knowing what had happened, pointing out that she had received some pretty poor grades in school. Because, poor grades, mean you can't tell if you've been molested or not. And those poor grades she got because she was Colin's sex slave. Jesus Christ. Since when did getting poor grades in school make anyone not understand if they had been raped or not? That's so absurd. What a shitty thing for the defense to do. Pretty sure you can be bad at dividing fractions or memorize the names of the different countries in Europe, but still know whether or not you've ever had an unwanted dick inside of you. The court also did a DNA test on Emily and Moses, proving that they were Colin's children. Both Moses and Annabelle's little sister Olivia are placed into foster care. Meanwhile, Colin testified for 3 days. He denied doing anything illegal, only admitting to having sex with Annabelle twice, consensually, once she was of legal age, of course, because he's a gentleman. He also denied, as he had before, knowing much about Aleister Crowley, his idol. What a fucking idiot. Like they're not going to expose that. Then he was exposed for the lying creep he was when prosecutor Peter Murphy read selections of Crowley's writings for the jury passages some of the most passionate and permanent attachments have begun with rape. Rome was founded thereon. Let all chaste women be utterly despised. Sex with anyone is not just permissible, but to be encouraged. Prostitution is to be admired. Then he asked Colin, is that a clue about how you saw things? Was that your world? A world you used to control and subdue children and young adults? Colin simply replied, no. Later on, Peter Murphy revealed that during the time Colin had been sending the women to brothels, each woman had netted him over 45,000 pounds. Holy shit. Colin denied that he'd received any of that money. Said he made his money from betting on some sports, and of course, breeding Rottweilers and Siamese cats, which is so laughable. Can you imagine buying a cat or dog from this psycho? Just how weird it would be. Welcome, traveler. I was expecting you. When I invoked ra-hoor-khuit, the unborn, the faceless, the hawk of hell, with my sex magic. When I penetrated the orifice leading to my next sire and feasted upon the infant's life force, ra-hoor-khuit presented me a vision of your arrival. He said you would ask for pussy, and I have the pussy you seek. This first kitten needs an active home. Nuit has placed an indistinguishable life fire inside its heart, and it is a rambunctious little kitty, destined for the palace. Praise the gods. This pussy can be yours for 100 pounds. But if the price to be paid is too great, you can have this other pussy, this demon of claws and piss and fury, this creature from the abyss for only 1 pound. She is destroying my life force, and I fear the gods are one more scratch or carpet piss away from a sacrifice. One more thing. If you would rather barter than buy, let your intention be known now. If you have young daughters, we can quickly arrange cashless understanding. Now do what thou wilt and claim your new pussy. Was that about how you imagined buying a cat from that clown? When Colin's wife Elaine testified, she claimed she'd been planning to leave Colin for a while, and she had now changed. Said she felt embarrassed to be married to him. Sure. She admitted to having threesomes with Colin and Jackie, but only found out later that Colin and Jackie had been having an affair, something she discovered when Jackie, of course, sent that birthday card to Colin I mentioned with the words "to my husband" written on it. Jackie, for her part, was not on the stand long, just long enough to coldly deny all the charges against her. On March 9th, the verdict came out. Colin, guilty on 35 charges. Hail Nimrod! Jackie found guilty of 5 offenses, including aiding and abetting rape, causing prostitution, and indecency with children. Too bad there were not additional charges related to participating in threesomes with her own fucking daughter. Elaine was found guilty on 5 counts of indecency with children, and Shelley was convicted of 2. Only Sandra got off entirely. As the convicted women were led away to the court's custody unit, an argument erupted with several of them shouting and shrieking at one another. Elaine could be heard yelling at Colin, "I fucking hate you." Well, I fucking hate all of you, Elaine. You can all go to the abyss. Sentencing would take place the next day. This is the first day that Annabelle would lay eyes on her abusers in person. Criminals filed in. Then came the Honorable Judge Paul Thomas. He would sentence Colin, now 48 years old, to imprisonment for public protection IPP, a type of indeterminate sentencing for serious crimes that no longer exist in the UK, with a minimum term of 11 years. IPP was a sentence handed out in England and Wales only between 2005 and 2012. It was intended for serious, violent, and sexual offenders who were considered too dangerous to be released after their original sentence ended, even if their crimes weren't serious enough for a life sentence. IPP sentences required prisoners to serve a minimum term, called a tariff. Before they could be considered for release by a parole board, prisoners had to prove to the parole board that they were no longer a danger to the public. And if they were unsuccessful, they could wait years before another hearing. Upon handing down the sentence, Judge Thomas said, "What happened thereafter has besmirched the unsuspecting town of Kidwelly. You formed a community within a community. You were described as evil. That, in my view, is an entirely accurate statement of your character. It is likely that you have dedicated your life since you were 12 years old, satisfying your sexual urges by whatever means at your disposal. The judge also launched into a blistering attack on the works of Aleister Crowley. The cult seems to have had its origins with Aleister Crowley and his Book of the Law, which is by any standard a ludicrous document. You set yourself up as a ruler in your own sick kingdom, surrounded by 3 women who dance to your attendance. God, I so often love it when judges say shit like this to when sentencing dirtbags. Judge Thomas said it was no coincidence that in Millar's address book, seized by the police and evidence, Batley was written in under the name of My Lord. The judge also highlighted how Batley took pleasure in forcing women into prostitution. You reveled in being provided with the salacious details of what they had to do to earn your money. Jackie Marlene, Annabelle's mom, now 42, was sentenced to 10 years. The judge told her, "You were clearly besotted with Batley in the Book of the Law, and I view you effectively as his second in command." God, I wish she and Colin had been sentenced to death. Elaine Batley, 47 years old, sobbed as the judge gave her 8 years in prison. Fuck her too. Shelley Millar, 35, also sobbed as she was given 5 years in jail. Fuck all the adults who dragged kids into this shit. After the sentencing, Constable Lindsay David read a joint statement from the victims. "It has been a nightmare journey for each and every one of us, and we hope that this can be the start of a new beginning. We have experienced the worst that life can throw at us, and all we want to do now is move forward with our lives." Detective Chief Inspector Mark Bergmansky, meanwhile, told the press that the police were delighted with the outcome of the trial. 2014, Elaine Batley, now 58, is freed after less than 4 years. In other words, half her sentence, which is so gross. Meanwhile, that year, Annabelle gives birth to her second child, a boy, a kid who was not the product of being raped by a deranged cult leader. She'd met the father through a job she took at a catering company, so that's awesome. She got to work in catering after all. A coworker there, Maisie, had a son named Finn that Maisie introduced her to, and the two hit it off, moved in together, got pregnant, and got married. And then Annabelle would now continue living in London as a happy mother of 2, which I so hope she is still doing. In 2017, Jackie Marlene, Annabelle's incestuous mother, now 53, is released after serving just 6 years, which is also bullshit. Hope Annabelle has nothing to do with her at all. She was an adult when she was manipulated by Colin. I don't think being under a cult leader's spell can absolve you of the sin of handing over your own daughter to be raped and also raping her yourself. I hope she fucking dies a terrible death. June of 2021, nearly 11 years of Colin's sentence has passed. During this time, there was a complicated change in sentencing laws. What he was sentenced to, that indeterminate sentence, no longer on the books. With the change in sentencing laws and the minimum term nearly over, speculation began swirling in Carmarthen, Wales, that maybe, just maybe, Colin was being released quietly. Well, no, he wasn't. Police and Ministry of Justice confirmed that Batley was still behind bars. Ministry of Justice spokesman said Colin Batley is still in custody at HMP Ashfield. Any decision to release him falls to the parole board, to whom he would need to prove he is no longer a danger to the public. He was referred to them last year in 2023 when he was 61. And any conclusion they have made has not been released publicly yet. But since there hasn't been any recent press about this pile of shit, I feel confident they haven't let him walk free. And hopefully they never, ever do. And with that, do what thou wilt. As long as it doesn't fuck with what other people wilt or involve animals and kids being abused, even if you somehow think they've consented to it because they don't know how to express what they wilt. And what I wilt is to wilt my way out of this timeline.
Good job, soldier. You made it back. Barely.
The Kidwelly sex cult. Can you imagine if you found out that Colin Batley and his group were your neighbors? How sickened you'd feel to know what was taking place just a few yards away? Thanks to Hollywood, I feel like when we think of sex cults, we tend to think of either far-flung compounds in very remote locations led by gurus in white flowing robes, or eyes wide shut-esque, places where people in masks are drinking fancy cocktails before ritually disrobing, fucking each other's brains out or something. Or if you're one of those QAnon Pizzagate types, which I certainly hope that you're not, because those are some of the dumbest conspiracies I've ever come across in my life, and I've come across so many dumb conspiracies. You might think of the basement of one infamous pizza place in D.C. that doesn't actually have a basement, or some shadowy government bases where elites and the reptilian masters gather to do their evil deeds, which includes fucking and sacrificing kids. But a nondescript house in a cul-de-sac in a quaint little Welsh town, with plenty of other kids around, going to school every day, with a bunch of neighbors all around. When you think about how many people were around who could have intervened, how many teachers, neighbors, coworkers, or some of the members, or coworkers of some of the members, it seems crazy that Colin Batley wasn't apprehended earlier. But his evil genius lay in the fact that children are especially moldable. They look towards adults to shape their worldview. And the biggest victims of the Kidwelly sex cult would be immersed in a world where Colin Batley and the church were the only thing standing between them and the abyss, which was basically hell. On the inverse side, if they did what the church wanted, which was always, of course, what Colin wanted, they would be rewarded with a path to the palace. Again, some version of heaven in Aleister Crowley's twisted and frankly idiotic teachings. Not a fan of that guy. Wasn't a fan of him after doing an episode on him a couple years ago. Less of a fan now. Just another grifter, twisting the spiritual pursuits of others to serve his own selfish and largely sexual ends. Certainly not a fan of Colin. Colin systematically broke down all of the rules and conventional morality that guide most people, leading his followers into a space that was nebulous and morally gray, a space where they could justify performing sexual acts on people who couldn't consent, or working as prostitutes in an effort to sleep with nearly 2,000 men to be on some fucking weird path. A space where Jackie Marling could somehow justify offering up her 7-year-old daughter and even perform sexual acts on the same daughter herself a few years later. Just beyond disgusting. All of this was justified by Colin's interpretation of the writings of Aleister Crowley, this British occultist who infamously performed all kinds of sex magic and wrote that the only truth in the world is to follow your own will, meaning that all you need to do is just whatever you want to do. Right? Once again, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And Colin would do that for far too long. Finally, though, his grip on his cult would loosen due to his scheme to make himself money via prostitution that enabled Annabelle Forrest to see that there was a great big world out there. Not a scary one where the gods would hurt her for disobeying, as Colin told her, but a better world of normal people who were able to support themselves and didn't treat it like garbage, and they lived the kinds of lives they wanted, not the lives Colin wanted them to live. And with that, Annabelle finally found the means to get out of the Kidwelly sex cult, along with her young daughter Emily, and then she would eventually go to the police and report Colin and take it down. Colin was arrested along with Jackie, Shelley, Elaine, and Sandra, the 4 women who had been his most trusted acolytes. All of them would get prison sentences besides Sandra, though many of those prison sentences seem far, far too short to me, given the debaucherous magnitude of their crimes. Today, the town of Kidwelly seems to have moved on, and for her part, Annabelle Forrest has too, and again is a happy mother of 2. So I guess, for as awful as all of this was, could have been worse? Annabelle's resiliency is about the only bright spot I take away from this mess. But what a bright spot it is, right? God, I hope she is thriving against all odds, because if she can thrive after all the shit that she went through, so can most of us. Time now for today's takeaways.
Timesuck Top 5 Takeaways.
Number 1, the Kidwelly sex cult was an Aleister Crowley-inspired occultist group led by Colin Batley that existed from the mid-'80s to 2010, but hit its peak in the mid-'90s when multiple families relocated from London to Kidwelly, Wales, a small town where they all lived on the same cul-de-sac. In these unsuspecting houses, Colin and his associates, his wife, Elaine, and several women with children, proceeded to abuse children sexually for over a decade. 5 victims would testify at the 2011 trial, but there were likely many more. Number 2, Colin Batley was heavily inspired by the works of Aleister Crowley, a British spiritualist and occultist whose works were in turn heavily influenced by Victorian attitudes towards sex. Belief in the power of sexual magic led Crowley to argue for some pretty messed up things, like that rape sometimes leads to good attachments, chaste women should be, hated, and the only thing you have to do in this world is to follow your own willpower, to do whatever you want. All of that was very inspiring to a sexually depraved dirtbag like Colin. Number 3, Colin not only forced himself on women and children, but paired people, children and adults, up in his cult, instructing them to have sex with one another, going as far as to tell Jackie Marling to have sex with her own daughter, Annabelle. He would also make Annabelle have sex with a cognitively disabled kid, Pete, as well as a young man, Thomas, who was there for insurance in case Annabelle got pregnant. Colin clearly got a thrill out of orchestrating these sexual encounters, something the judge in his case identified in Colin's scheme to have the young women work for him in brothels. But of course, he told these women that they were working towards becoming the Scarlet Woman, sleeping with 1,854 men so they could advance on their path to the palace. Number 4, Colin Batley was sentenced to prison for at least 11 years, but really an indeterminate sentence for the protection of the public. Those 11 years have now been up for several years, and Batley still has not been released. Let's hope he never will be. Number 5, new info, and something light. Not about the cult, but about where the cult operated. These days, Wales has experienced a bit of a global resurgence, thanks to a wildly popular fictional universe, Game of Thrones and House of the Dragons, Westeros. House of the Dragon, the Game of Thrones spinoff, filmed in 8 locations across North Wales last year. While Dragonstone, the ancestral home of the House Targaryen, originally had its exterior shots taken from locations in Spain, this time around, the Rivals, a group of mountains in Wales, hosted the legendary castle. During filming, locals spotted that some rocks were draped with banners bearing the sigil of the Rhaenyra Targaryen. House of the Dragons also took advantage of some of Wales' older locations, with the Penmachno Roman Bridge in Conway County also featuring in the new season. It's believed that the aftermath of a major battle was filmed here for the new series after fans reported seeing multiple prop corpses. In total, about 8 locations in Wales were featured in the new season, and like in Croatia, which experienced a huge boost in tourism following the success of Game of Thrones, locals expect a big increase in visitors in the coming years. Glad that something positive is bringing people to Wales, which I visited years ago, and it is gorgeous.
Timesuck Top 5 Takeaways.
The Kidwelly sex cult has been sucked. Thanks to the Bad Magic Productions team for the help in making Timesuck, starting with Queen of Bad Magic, Lindsay Cummins. Thanks to Logan Keith helping to publish this episode and designing merch for the store at badmagicproductions.com. Thank you to Sophie Evans for her initial research this week. Also, thanks to the All Seeing Eyes moderating the Cult of the Curious private Facebook page, the Mod Squad, making sure Discord stays running smooth, and everyone over on the Timesuck subreddit and Bad Magic subreddits. And now it is time for this week's Timesucker Updates.
Updates? Get your Timesucker updates.
Our first update's coming in from some kind of geography wizard, Cam Jacques, who writes in fairly with a subject line of, "What the fuck did you mean?" Hi, Timesuck. I saw the most recent episode about the Gainesville Ripper. I started to give it a listen as soon as I could. I moved to Gainesville about 2 years ago and work at the university now. None of that matters, though, because in the first 2 minutes of the episode, when talking about the Ripper's first victim, you say something along the lines of, maybe she was taken in Gainesville's beaches or partying with her neighbors. What the fuck did you mean by that, beaches? In Gainesville, Florida? Brother, I have lived here for 2 years now. And if this is how I find out that there are beaches I could have been relaxing at this whole time, I'm going to be peeved. Tell me, wizard, where are these secret beaches and how do I find them? Best beachless in Gainesville. That was an embarrassing mistake, beachless. Especially because I know that Gainesville is in the center of Florida, not on the coast, kind of like Orlando, but I just so strongly associate Florida with beaches in my brain and so strongly associate college kids in Florida with going to the beach. I guess I just threw her on a beach that does not exist. This was not the only email to come in about this, not even close. I fucked up. Gainesville is actually over an hour's drive from the coast. So I'll give myself 20 lashes, all right? Next up, another Florida sack, super sucker Chris Twiggs, from whom the Gainesville Ripper episode hit especially hard for. He wrote in with the subject line of, "I was dreading this suck, Danny Rowling." Hi, Dan. My son and I are both longtime space lizards, and my daughter, who is proudly serving in the U.S. Army in South Korea, is also a longtime listener. My kids got me into this podcast, and we often talk about episodes and share inside jokes around their other brother, a Cheesecake Factory employee, so you can imagine what we joke about. Excuse me, as much as I enjoy the podcast, I always knew that you would get around to the Gainesville murders, and I didn't know if I'd be able to listen. It's hard to believe it's been almost 34 years since the day I was sitting in the dining hall at Florida State University, and a high school friend came to tell me that our friend Christy Powell had been murdered. Christy was an amazing young woman. My kids have seen her smiling face and boundless energy captured on video in the school drama productions she and I were in just a few months before her life was tragically ended. As you mentioned in the episode, her memorial service was overflowing with friends and family. A sad high school reunion much sooner than we expected. We all followed the search, capture, trial, and execution of Christy's killer in a surreal, this isn't supposed to happen to people we love fog. But eventually life moved on. A few years later, I graduated from college and grad school and got married to an amazing woman who got into medical school at the University of Florida. So we moved from Tallahassee to Gainesville. Reminders of the murders were still present around town, including a beautiful mural in memory of Christy and the other victims. One night, however, an unexpected reminder went a bit too far. We were poor, Dan, as I was in my first part-time teaching job at Santa Fe Community College, and my wife was a medical student, so we welcomed any opportunity to find a free meal. The Alachua County Medical Society had monthly dinner meetings and invited medical students and their spouses to attend for free. I got used to hearing lectures on diabetes management and hypertension meds, and honestly, they never interrupted my chewing. This night was different. The speaker was the Alachua County Medical Examiner, and he decided to talk about the Gainesville murders. I know the topic wasn't announced in advance because I certainly would not have attended. My wife grew up in another part of Florida, and we met after the murder, so she never knew Christy. Maybe that, or the fact that she had classes every week with human cadavers in the room, gave her the strength to hold my hand to keep me calm as, over wine and dessert, I was caught completely off guard by a slideshow of the murder scenes. The speaker talked through the causes of death, forensic evidence, shocking displays the killer left at each location. Dan, I pray that you and your listeners never have to see a friend the way I saw Christy in those slides. Most of the medical students at that dinner were our same age. Some of them went to undergrad in Gainesville. There was one other medical student who knew Christy from high school, but lucky for him, he was home studying that night. However, the medical examiner had to have known there was a chance the victims had friends in the room when he decided to show those slides. What an asshole. Thank you, Dan, for the care you always take in presenting murder victims as real people. I didn't know the others whom Rowling killed, but considering what I saw in that slideshow, I dreaded how they would be described on Timesuck. Forgive me if I don't go back and listen to this one again, but at least I know when my kids listen, they will understand a bit more why there's a tear in my eye the next time they pull out those videos from high school trying to embarrass me. Thank you for making me laugh, making me think, and giving me something to share with my adult kids. 3 out of 5 stars, wouldn't change a thing. Chris Twiggs. P.S. If you read this on the podcast, please tell Second Lieutenant Faith Twiggs in South Korea that I am proud of her and love her more than toast. Oh, wow, Chris, man. Holy shit. I am so sorry for your loss of a friend, and also sorry you saw what you saw. Yeah, I truly can't imagine seeing some friend of mine in that way. Just like the rage, the sorrow. So glad Danny Rowling is no longer around. It is unbelievable how selfish some of us media acts can be. It's like truly uncompromisingly to the core of our being, selfish with zero empathy for the suffering of others. So cold-blooded to the core. People who are truly unnecessarily cruel. I am so glad I don't have a person like that in my circle of friends and any family I have had like that. I have cut them out. And yeah, thank you, Second Lieutenant Faith Twiggs, for your service. I hope you're enjoying your time in South Korea. That's a place I really want to visit someday. I pretty much want to visit every place. Now call your dad and thank him for being a great one. Right? You give him the biggest hug next time you see him. You can never hug your parents enough. More Florida news, and thanks for your service. Thanks for listening. More Florida news coming in from a super sweet Florida sack now, Evan. Evan did not ask to have his last name be left out, but I don't want to risk getting him in trouble with his congregation. He writes in with the subject line of a UF alum's new info on the Gainesville Ripper. Dan, longtime listener, first-time Timesucker updater. I graduated from UF in 2021, still live in Gainesville. As you mentioned, the city's population nearly doubled since the time of the murders. It has changed quite a bit, even in the years I've lived here. One thing that hasn't changed, though, is a unique memorial to the 5 victims on Southwest 34th Street, which you mentioned multiple times during the episode. In between a lot of botched attempts at saying Alachua County. I'm probably still saying it wrong. Not far from where Danny Rowling would have been camping is the 34th Street Bridge, which is the kind of place where graffiti is technically illegal, but it's a rite of passage to spray something on the wall. The wall is on a hill, and on the panel at the peak is a simple mural that says, "Remember 1990. Sonia Larson, Christina Powell, Krista Hoyt, Manny Taboda, and Tracy Paulus." Right next to the mural are also 5 palm trees and a traffic median, each one bearing a plaque with the victim's name. The mural is sacred and has remained unchanged over the last 34 years, despite the rest of the wall being constantly graffitied over. If someone does deface the mural, it is restored almost always within a day or even a matter of hours. At one point in 2022, the Gainesville police chief asked the public to restore the mural after it sat defaced for almost a week. Allegedly, the UF Interfraternity Council is in charge of keeping the mural intact, but nobody is taking credit for it. I'm proud to say that while most UF students come to Gainesville with no idea of what happened in 1990, just like I did, almost all of us leave having seen that iconic black mural thousands of times. Take care and go Gators, Evan. P.S. You don't have to read this on air if you don't want to. I just wanted to say that I love the show and the way you approach faith-related topics in good faith. I'm sure it's easy to punch down on Christians as a comedian, especially when people who call themselves Christians are usually doing stuff that generates unlimited source material, but I'm always encouraged by the way you approach the subject with understanding. Also, I work as a minister in a Southern Baptist church, and by the grace of God, have not been Cummins lot in the church office yet, but you can expect quite the Timesucker update when that day comes. PPS, you mentioned that Gainesville was named after Edmund P. Gaines. Apparently the thing he was best known for in his day was shooting a cannonball into the armory of a fortress filled with hundreds of escaped slaves. Over 270 men, women, and children died in that explosion. Leave it to Floridians to name a city after that guy. Oh, shit. Evan, thanks for the update about this memorial. I love that over 3 decades after those senseless murders occurred, the victims have not been forgotten. The longer I talk about these serial killers, the sadder what they do makes me. Right? It really is just so much easier to be good than to go out there and do wrong. When I was an angry teen, that didn't seem true, but it was. It was then, and it is now. My son Kyler, he is such a sweet kid, so much empathy, no angry young man in him, just a lot of kindness and compassion. And the thought of some dirtbag taking him out of this world, taking him in such a horrific way, that makes me want to do something really bad, I guess. You know, I had no real sympathy when we started talking about these serial killers, and I have less now. You, as a follower of Christ, as I imagine, an excellent pastor, you might be able to forgive a sinner like Danny Rowling, but me, once they've crossed that line, I just want them to end. And not just out of vengeance, not just out of bloodlust, but as a preventative measure so that they can't do it again. Thanks for the kind words, Pastor. I try. I try not to get angry about certain aspects of religion, not just Christianity. When I see people use scripture, use their religion, to endorse hateful acts they commit. I just want people to be nice to each other, to help and not hate, or to not unreasonably hate. Hate killers like Danny Rowling. Judge them, maybe lay off the man who wants to lie with another man kind of thing. You've listened, so you know what I'm talking about. And I would like to think that my anger comes from a pretty good place, a place of wanting to protect others just from harm. And I did not know about Edmund P. Gaines' cannibal incident. That's so crazy, the way that so many of us have looked at other humans as so much less than human in different eras of history. And some people do that now, right? Man, thanks for all the info. Now go hit one of those beautiful Gainesville beaches. Oh, have the time of your life in those beautiful Gainesville beaches. Now, one more from sweet sucker Lauren Roberts, who wrote in with the subject line of, I Cummins lot all over myself. Howdy, Dan and team. I just wanted to share the most perfect chain of events to ever happen. A quick setup, I work for a murder mystery dinner theater company. The shows are incredibly silly and ridiculous, and in no way, shape, or form the proper way to solve a murder. We also work with no fourth wall, and a big chunk of the show is audience participation. While listening to the Monster of Florence episode, I kept thinking to myself, wow, this is playing out like one of our shows. We've even used the Benny Hill theme song in one of our shows when the detective character was leading the audience in a group frisk. Oh, I love it. Maybe that's the thing in Florence, who knows? Fast forward to last week when we were performing one of our murder mysteries. We had just gotten to the part in our show when the detective character walks into the room to begin his investigation. Suddenly, an audience member's phone rings loudly, and I shit you not, his ringtone was the Benny freaking Hill theme song. When I tell you it took every fiber of my being to keep it together because my onstage boyfriend was violently murdered, and I was the prime suspect, so now was not the time to laugh, but gosh dang, I thought I was going to explode. Thankfully, I managed to keep it together, but heck, that was hard. I've been working this gig for over 8 years and perform an average of 45 shows per year, and I've never been so close to breaking character as I was in that moment. I tried to explain it to my husband on our way home. He worked for the same company, and we worked these gigs together, but he's behind on Timesuck episodes, so we had no clue what I was talking about. He's still a great husband and an awesome dad, though, and so a shout-out to Tom, if you read this on the show, would be great. He made me listen to the Albert Fish episode, and my twisted mind has been hooked ever since. Hail Nimrod, keep on sucking. Can't wait till summer camp 2025. Much love, Lauren Roberts. Well, Lauren, first off, I'm so glad you're coming to summer camp in 2025. I think it's going to be amazing. And unlike the last 2 summer camps I helped host, where I was pretty tired, I should be good and rested for this one. And also, how about this? Why is it so fun? I would have broke character. I love this little ditty so much. You keep loving life with awesome dad and husband, Tom. Thank you very much, Lauren. Thanks all of you for sending this message. And I thought this was going to end quicker. I was going to try and time it, to me stop talking when it ends. And then it just kind of just keeps going. But it's almost over now. It was still fun to listen to. Let's get out of here.
Next time, suckers, I needed that.
We all did.
Well, thank you for listening to another Bad Magic Productions podcast. Scared to Death and Timesuck each week. Short Sucks, a Nightmare Fuel on the Timesuck and Scared to Death podcast feed some weeks. Please don't use the weird teachings of Aleister Crowley to justify sex with kids this week or any other week. Don't always do what thou wilt. Maybe run what you wilt by a few other people. See if they think you should still do what you wilt. And if they don't, I don't know, maybe don't do what you wilt. Maybe do what they wilt. Maybe just keep your hands to yourselves and me in your ears and wilt to keep on sucking.
Bad Magic Productions.
Welcome back, traveler. Ra-hoor-khuit, the unborn, the faceless, the hawk of hell, told me you would return. I hear your pussy has been a naughty little pussy. I offer no refunds, but would you care to join my quest for eternal enlightenment? Would you like some sex magic? Would you like to feel the wand of ra-hoor-khuit penetrate your very being? Wait, stop, where are you going? How do you know the fleas you speak of came from me? Why must you assume the kitty's intestinal parasites came from my temple? I mean, the kitty has been with you for a full day. Perhaps your veterinarian is wrong. How should I know why your kitty has cold sores? No, these are not cold sores you see upon my lips. You witnessed the mark of Hadith. Please, let us work something out before you lose your very soul to the abyss. Do what thou wilt, unless thou wilt to report me for running a filthy kitten farm. Please don't wilt to do that.